It's 9 a.m. and this is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Fort Myers Beach Local Planning Agency. Not all members are present. Would everybody just say your name for the record? We're missing Don Sutta.
Scott Safford.
Pat Vanass.
Jane Plummer.
Anita Saracita.
Jim Bowen.
Doug Ekman.
So absent. Did Don request an absence? Do we know? Okay, maybe he's just running late. We'll see what happens here. If you would please stand for the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we gather here today to talk about some pretty important business relative to our comprehensive plan, and let's all keep the future very clearly in mind on this beautiful September day. Amen.
Amen.
Before we go any further, I'm just going to let the attorney, Becky, is going to, and it's so nice to have you here with us today. I'd also like to thank Mayor Allers for being in attendance. You're coming to see how things are done, aren't you? Becky, you've got an announcement.
Yes, I just want to, we asked the town clerk to come today to swear in the witnesses. So we're going to take that out of order. If anyone is going to be testifying today with regard to the quasi-judicial hearing that is on the agenda, could y'all stand up, including staff, and raise your right hand and be sworn in?
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Perfect. Y'all are sworn for the hearing later on today.
Thank you, Becky. We were going to take things a little out of order, but I think we'll just move ahead with the agenda as it is. May I have a motion for the approval of the minutes for August 8th as they were distributed, or with any corrections?
I move to approve.
Second.
There's a motion by Jane and a second by Jim. Is there any discussion on that? Is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries unanimously. Next item is public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to make public comment in the meeting today? Jim.
Good morning. For the record, Jim Enck, 430 Estero Boulevard, and Anna Consultant. It's more of a request or clarification of when you get to the comp plan, do you plan on taking public input at that point? Or is this the time to speak on that?
Jim, I would go ahead and speak on that because this is just a presentation and brief discussion, and then it's going to be revisited by the LPA in October.
That's why I was asking the question.
Go right ahead.
As you know, my name is Jim Enck. We have property, family property at 430 Estero Boulevard, but I am also a consultant on the island and long time been a retired member of the city plan board for 15 years and the county LPA for many years. I've read through the documentation of the comp plan amendments and just have some comments for you to consider. These are out of context without seeing the actual presentation. But some of what I've seen in there is policy 1A8. It talks about implementing a code to address storm surge and sea level, which I think is a good idea. And I don't know if that falls into the LDC policy of the 3 feet freeboard or not, and it needs to be discussed in that aspect. 1AD, where it talks about providing illustrations, that sounds like potential in the urban nodes of the 4 urban areas that are proposed, of almost a smart code type situation where there's do this, don't do that kind of illustrations And I think that would be a very good way to handle that, to get the idea of what the town's vision is for how they want to see the redevelopment of the urban core areas. 1A13, I did notice that there was quite a few things that, from my experience, we tried to stay away from in Lee County, is there's actual almost implementing code language. You can, and you should in the comp plan, have things set like maximum densities, minimum densities, FARs, those kind of things. But putting in an implementation, especially the one I saw was workforce housing, where you sit there and say it's got to be a 30-year area, which I don't think is a bad thing. I'm not commenting one way or another, but if you put it in the comp plan and you find that you need to modify it, instead of having it in the LDC, which is easy to do internally in the town, now you're modifying it, you're sending it to the state, it just becomes a different level. And one of the things we did at Lee County when we revamped the comp plan was to really focus on anything that looked like regulatory or implementing language, is finding a way to describe the vision and the goal and the policy, but not make it hard and fast of this is what it needs to be. And one of the other examples that I had in there, that's in there a couple times, is when it talks about uses in the district, especially in the mixed use district, it's very specific of listing 5 or 6 items. You could be tripped up if somebody comes in with a not listed, but kind of like it. And then as you go through a zoning process, depending on how you rule, you could get one side or the other side and you end up in court. And that's obviously not the goal of having that. So revamping some of those to describe in a more visionary of how you want the arts and entertainment district to be arts related, entertainment related, but not say dining with outside seating. That starts to get a little specific from my experience.
Jim, if you could wrap up, your 3 minutes is up.
Okay, I got like 30 seconds. Building height. It says we want 3-story, 30 feet, but then the next paragraph says the town will entertain doing different building heights. I just find that language needs some work on it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? Okay, hearing none, we'll close the public comment. Next item on the agenda is the first of public hearings. It is the EZ zoning district changes to allow repair of accessory structures by special exception and criteria for special exception. Sarah, is this you?
Good morning. Sarah Probst with Community Development.
Sarah, hold on one second. Could the record reflect that member Dawn Sudduth has or is present? Thank you.
As some of you may remember, the EC zoning district language was amended in 2020 to reduce and clarify what could be built and repaired within the EC zoning district. That is the land that's seaward of the 1978 coastal construction control line that I'm going to refer to as the CCCL from now on in this presentation. In 2020, the town council voted to disallow the repair of major accessory structures. There appear to be, within the EC zoning district, there appear to be about a half a dozen pools that extend beyond the CCCL. So they're in the EC zoning district, at least partially. Some of these have been damaged and need repairs. One condominium has reached out to the town about repairing its pool that is partially in the EC, and staff has been directed to provide potential language to allow those types of repairs. The language before you today is intended to allow the repair of existing major accessory structures, which are partially or fully seaward of the CCCL, with approval of a special exception. Included in the language is also some ideas for what criteria should be considered for approval of a special exception for repair of structures in the EC. I would like you to consider the proposed language and provide any input that you may have, and then recommend that move forward to the town council.
Thank you, Sarah. Dawn, you have any input on this?
Do I have any input?
Scott?
No.
Patrick?
Yes. If you go to page
14.
14 for the
Mhm.
PDF.
Yep.
The struck through language, you've got redevelopment as struck through.
Mhm.
You guys added repair.
Yes.
And there are other provisions further down in that section that says if someone goes through a plan development process and they demonstrate that through hydrological models and everything, that there's been beach accretion and that the CCCL could be moved,
Mhm.
then they're allowed to present that.
Mhm.
And through that finding, they're allowed to redevelop a property.
Okay.
So by striking that through, we take away basically that opportunity for someone to go through that process.
Okay.
Because right now, it would just say repair
So you would prefer that it say repair
Repair.
or redevelopment?
and/or. you
Okay.
know, Redevelop.
Jane, any
Good
comment on
call.
that?
No, not at this time.
Jim, any comments?
No comment.
How about you, Doug?
No comments, ma'am.
Patrick, I'm concerned about that, only in as much as I remember when we did this, the notion of redevelopment, if it were new development, I don't think we want any new development seaward of the coastal construction line, or are you just saying the course of the whole property being redeveloped, that nothing would change in that line push? Is that what you're saying?
So if you read the entire section.
Yep.
Comprehensively, it says at some point that you can have a structure, a house, let's say.
Yep.
That is seaward of the coastal construction line. And it says that if someone goes through the plan development process, brings in the right experts, demonstrates, let's say, that there's been beach accretion and that the CCL line could shift. And it requires quite a lot of work and quite a lot of expertise to demonstrate that. But someone through the PD process would have that opportunity today. So by crossing out redevelopment, we're taking that right away. And we're just leaving them with the opportunity to repair. So if we don't think that PD process and that process is viable, or we don't want to allow that, that's a different issue. But just by crossing redevelopment, we're taking that away. And unless staff demonstrates why we should be taking that away, I'm all for protecting what people had and not changing it.
Sarah, you have any comments on that?
No. I think that if you would prefer to leave redevelopment, and we were of the mind of what you had said previous, or what you had kind of said, that when the LPA and the town council had gone through this process before, it seemed that was maybe a holdover. And when staff and I were talking about what redevelopment meant, does that mean repair? Does that mean build something new? Because that doesn't, basically, we were not clear on what redevelopment meant and weren't particularly comfortable with it. But if council or if LPA feels that it needs to stay and that it is supported by another section of the code, that's fine.
I'd like to ask, I have that same thought. I understand what repairs are in my mind anyway, but redevelopment, I'm not sure what that
Becky, you
means.
don't know our rules about that, do you? Teasing. Go ahead, Doug, sorry.
So I think I'm sympathetic to what Pat was saying, but what is redevelopment of, is it like, I mean, to me, any development is new development.
Mhm.
What's redevelopment? My question.
And we were thinking along the same lines, that it was repair of the structure that existed or development. We didn't fully understand how redevelopment would play into this. And we didn't want somebody coming down the road and saying, well, there used to be this house that was there X number of years ago. This says we can go through this special exception process and redevelop it. But I also understand what Patrick is saying, that it's supported by another section of code. And if there is a process for that, or Or maybe we change that to repair or development. And then it has to be supported by the process that it
Yeah.
refers to as in the PD section.
And I wouldn't object to development. So the relevant section is on page 16. If you go to B,
Mhm.
and that whole paragraph talks about when existing major structures that were built partially or fully seaward of the 1978 coastal construction control line are reconstructed, they shall be rebuilt landward of this line. Exceptions to this rule may be permitted through the plan development process. So again, and then it talks about the town shall seek the opinion of the Florida DEP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got a whole section of the code that avails someone of another process. And we got to be careful not to take that away from them. That's all. So if we prefer development versus redevelopment, I'm okay with that.
Could we say repair or reconstructed?
Yeah.
Would that make sense?
I'd be comfortable with that.
I go for that.
And I'm not sure that it is reconstruction. I think that this would be when they're talking about, well, exceptions to this rule. So this is what's interesting about this. It says they have to be reconstructed. They shall be rebuilt landward of the line. And then the exceptions are they can be reconstructed in the same place, but they have to go through the PD process. So it really doesn't even talk about new development. It really does
No.
only talk about.
Yes.
Reconstruction.
No, reconstruction.
So do we want to change that redevelopment, which is rather vague, to reconstruction? Jason, do you have?
I think that would be more consistent.
Sorry, Jason Green. I heard your guys' conversation. There isn't a PD in the EC. They're two different zoning districts. That's why that language caught my ear and concern about it. So I don't know if that's remnant from maybe it was an overlay or something in Lee County, but the two different zoning districts. You have EC zoning district, and then you have a PD zoning district.
Yeah.
Well,
but
You would, and we have never approved a
You
PD cross the 78 line,
So what it's saying is through the PD process. So you.
which has never
request-
been done past that 78 line.
Understood.
And it wouldn't be applicable to EC because there wouldn't be any EC anymore.
I understand, but
So-
the thing is, we advertise a hearing today,
Mhm.
and we identify what we're trying to change,
Mhm.
and this inadvertently changes a whole section. Again, if staff is prepared to explain to us why this is not valid and that we should change it, I think we can bring it back up to another hearing, but let's not inadvertently change a whole code section.
Sure.
That,
Yeah, I mean, I think that part needs to be cleaned up because again, we've been dealing with like Pink Shell and some others that had some older PDs and there are no PD zoning districts past the 78 line.
Yeah.
At the 78 line, it starts EC. So there isn't a process in the EC to do a PD because those are, you're talking about two different zoning districts in the same sentences, and that's an issue, frankly. But it's been there for a while, so.
yeah, but I think what this is referring to is a process. Basically talking about the PD process where you come in and you ask to change the zoning with regards to a public hearing process where you can have experts provide testimony as to why that line should be moved. And
Correct.
again, I've never seen it done. I've never done
Right.
it, but
I guess what I would say is the language and conversation about a process unrelated to the zoning district that this language is in, it's in the wrong spot then. And maybe that's something we can handle separately then, because we did this last time we changed the EC. There was language in 3 different sections of the code that were in the wrong section. They were talking about the coastal areas. There was a section of code and it started mentioning about things that were allowed in the EC when you've got to go to the EC section to look at what you're allowed to do in the EC. So we cleaned some of that up and apparently there's still some problem because you shouldn't have a PD language in the EC zoning district section of the code. The PD language should be in the PD section of the code. There shouldn't be a reference to PD in the EC section. So,
well.
but that can, we
yeah,
can clean that.
Well, that's where I disagree with you. A PD, a plan development can be, you can ask to rezone an existing zoning district and go to a PD.
Correct.
So in many codes and many comp plans, you are allowed to go through that rezoning process.
Absolutely.
And typically it's referred to because they want a public hearing. That's essentially. what
Right,
they
but it
want.
doesn't belong in
You
the
could
EC section. That's all I'm saying. We don't talk about PDs in the RC zoning district section. We don't talk about PDs in the commercial boulevard section. That's my only point. The section and the rights to do that absolutely need to be protected, but
Yeah.
That's all.
And if we need to change it instead of PD,
Right.
say through a public hearing process.
Right.
I'm fine with that.
when you have PD language in other zoning district sections of your code, to me, it's an overlay PD versus a zoning district PD, but we have a PD zoning district. So CPD and RPD are separate zoning districts. Anyway, I don't think that changes what we're talking about, but it's some language that maybe we have to revisit. Absolutely. Again, we're trying to make sure that when we're talking about things in certain code sections that they're dealing with that subject, right? And this code has a lot of mixture. And so we're trying to, over time, clean some of that up as we go. Anyway, when I heard that PD and the EC, I just want to point that out, that they're two different zoning districts. They shouldn't be mixed. You can do a PD if yes, and that's up to somebody to apply for that, but things in the PD shouldn't be in the EC section of the code.
But I think
That's all.
that's what Patrick's point was.
Yes,
You don't want to eliminate that option for someone, that they could in fact go through that process because it's enabled in that section B. And, okay, so the real question is, as opposed to the word redevelopment, do we include Doug's suggestion of reconstruction, or is there something better still? What are your thoughts on that?
Better words.
I like reconstruction because when you go to that next section, it does use the word reconstruction.
Yes,
So
it
now
does.
We're creating
So we're-
consistency.
Yeah, I think that was a great suggestion, Doug. So could we, now we got
Uh-oh.
another
so,
one coming
and
up.
just, I
Cause
don't
in
think
trouble.
I don't think the language about the plan development in that section, because it's talking about beaches, it doesn't supersede, but it has to work with the other sections of code that talk about plan developments. So
Okay,
that's the biggest thing. It seems silly to have it twice, but I get, because we have a beaches section, it's kind of duplicating some of the language, and that's fine.
okay. Are you three on board with what we're saying about reconstruction? They're not.
Yes, I think that we understand and maybe change that language to reconstruction to make it in line with what it says later in the code.
Consistent,
Okay, yes.
okay?
And thank you, Patrick, for pointing that out.
Are you proposing to delete the word repair? Or is it going to be
No, it's
repair and reconstruct?
Repair or reconstruction. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, is there anything else in this section, Sarah, that you need us to address?
I would like you to weigh in on the additional regulations and considerations for special exception approval. These would apply to any instance where someone needed to seek a special exception. And I want to make sure that you agree that those are appropriate for repair or, well, in this instance, it would be repair because that's what's allowed by special exception.
Jim, you have any comments on that section? It's page 16.
Yeah.
Don, any comments? Scott?
No.
Nope.
Patrick? Jane?
Nothing.
Jim?
No.
How about you, Doug?
No, ma'am.
I didn't have any either. I didn't have anything highlighted here, Sarah, so it seems those suggestions are all good.
Okay.
You know, I'll just point out that letter D on page 17, the structure must be moved landward of the CCCL if it's reasonable to do so. That reasonable word bothers me a lot because, I mean, what's reasonable to me and what's reasonable to someone else, it's very subjective.
And
I kind of had the same thing highlighted, but again.
At some point, somebody's got to use some discretion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and a pool, and we know why this is coming to us regarding a pool, and that seems pretty obvious. But if it were something else, I think it leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
Oh, me too. I can make a short list of the something else, but, okay.
So with that, and I recognize that it was, it's very subjective language. However, a lot of the special exception language is
Sure.
relatively
Sure.
subjective. So I wanted, like you said, somebody's got to, use their own sense of the situation. But I don't mind changing it if there's an issue with it.
I just don't, when I read it, I didn't have a suggestion for you
Okay.
because I understand why you've got it there.
And
Just
unfortunately, I
make
don't think there's a better word for what
No.
we're trying to grasp here. It's sort of commonly used in all sorts of contracts and documents that it's subjective, but it kind of puts some boundary on it. Yeah.
sure. Okay, go ahead.
The more I look at it is we're creating a section where through a special exception process, you can keep your pool seaward of the CCCL. And then we create D that says the structure must move landward when you're creating an exception to it. And then the caveat is that, well, it's got to be reasonable.
It's not reasonable
So
to
it's
move
not
a whole
reasonable, you
pool.
can keep it, but the whole section is about keeping it. I think we could strike through D completely.
So you would,
So
So-
basically, you start off with the premise of you're not allowed,
yeah.
and you have to go through the special exception to be allowed.
Mhm.
But you don't throw something back in there that it must, because the assumption is already it must be built landward. And then if you can, or if there's special circumstances, then you go through the special exception.
By putting this language in here, I did want to allow the decision makers the sort of like backstop of, wait, there's another option, which, I mean, you can also just assume that on your own. It doesn't have to be in the code section. So if you'd prefer that I remove that, I don't have a problem with it either.
I think it should be removed also because it, in D, how come this has two Ds?
There were two pieces.
Yeah.
There are
Oh,
two Ds.
My apologies.
In the first D,
Mhm.
It says that, it must be applied each time, special exception must be applied each time. I mean, you have to look at it each time,
Mhm.
and then you can, if it continues to become a problem, then you can say, this needs to be moved. And that's logical, but you can't be logical and do this when it's supposed to be, because who's logical, I mean, so I think the second D could be removed because it does stop what could happen previously. So I agree.
What if, so it's easy to imagine a pool is pretty unreasonable to move. What if somebody had like, I'm just making something up, like a bathhouse or something, and they want to repair it? You could say, well, yeah, but why don't you just put it on the other side of the coastal line and rebuild it there? And that would be a reasonable assumption to make. And I'm not sure that situation's covered without that clause.
Okay, so we're hearing
Well-
both sides.
Doug, wouldn't the assumption of it should go landward, and if you don't want it to be landward, you have to come in through the special exception. And you have to demonstrate that.
So
through
you
that
request
process.
the special exception.
So you start off with the assumption of it should go
Okay,
landward.
I'm okay with that. Yeah.
So the consensus is to remove this second D, D2, or
There's
to
no
leave it
reason
in
for a-
place?
I think there's no reason for a special exception if you have to move it anyway. So
I think it's just reaffirming the principle of the section, which is ultimately, we don't want anything seaward of the coastal construction control line.
but you wouldn't be asking for it if you didn't need it.
Okay, so you'd like to remove that section.
I would.
How about you, Don?
I was just gonna say, could you take D and just put a new special exception must be applied for each time the structure is repaired, or, well, doesn't that cover it?
Yeah, the D is there.
Yeah, the first D covers it.
Yeah.
So you don't need the second D. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, I agree.
How about you, Scott?
I agree.
Patrick, you agree too? Jim, what do you think?
Well, I have a question. Is D on page 17, a continuation of D on page 16?
Oh.
Or is that supposed to be E and it's be read separately?
It was supposed to be E.
Okay.
So my apologies on that.
What does it do?
It
if
jumped
it's
to the
a-
next page and
special
I,
exception must be private, destruction must be moved by-
or it could be combined.
I just, I'm reading it combined and it's still. That was a very lawyer thing. Okay, so the consensus is remove D2 or E.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else, Sarah?
Nope, that would be all.
Okay. This is a public hearing, so I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to give testimony in this case? Jim?
For the record, Jim Inc. again, this seems to be a fairly isolated case where there's a limited number of repair items. And a suggestion I would like to put out there to keep the bureaucracy down. As you know, special exception is a good way to do that, except there's a sudden uncertainty of what if you have a pool, you come through the special exception and it's decided, no, we don't like it, where potential protecting private property rights is in the primary structure, you're allowed 25% repair by right in the primary structure. Why can't we have that also in accessory structures? So therefore you have a pool worth $100,000. If you can fix it for 25,000, you go on and do what you need. If you can't, then you have to go through the special exception process.
Thank you, Jim.
And just for clarification, we are talking the 78 line
Yes.
CCCL line, which I put those monuments in.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Is there anyone else? Sarah, what was your thoughts on what Jim just had to say? It seems to add another. I hate that you have to walk back and forth. You know, maybe what we should do
Get
next.
another,
Yeah, we need more.
We need more microphones.
more microphones.
Steal
So
Becky's next time.
we had discussed this approach. The issue that we came across, people are very frustrated by the requirement to get assessments, and we're not sure that they can get an accurate assessment of an existing accessory structure. When you look at assessments of properties,
Mhm.
those accessory structures aren't really pulled out in that same way. So it would be difficult to get a valid assessment. So it would actually, we felt that it might put an extra burden on them to get an assessment, and then they would have to get a quote on what the repair cost would be. So we actually thought that the special exception may be a less arduous way to do it, but we could try to do the percentage. We have just heard a lot of complaints regarding the percentage.
Okay,
Yeah, I
folks,
would
what are your
offer-
thoughts about the threshold?
well,
I would offer that, yeah, it's like, okay, you've got a pool and it's going to cost $25,000 to fix it, but it's pretty hard to identify
The value.
what, was it a $100,000 pool or a $95,000 pool or
We're
just
back in
what?
the 50% rule.
Yeah.
And also, you know, we know what they could get an estimate of what to build that pool now would cost, but what is the value of it decreased over time? And we just thought that it might not be something that would be as easy to get, and it might
Okay.
be more problematic.
Okay.
Anita,
But we
Yeah.
could leave it in there.
Jane?
I agree because the appraisers will not appraise pools, docks, those kind of things, anything that is other than the structure. So who would be the person that would put the value on there? And that's a whole nother ballgame.
Okay.
So I
Scott,
agree.
what was your thought?
This is kind of the same thing. I mean, with inflation, what are you going to, something to repair is probably worth more than the pool itself. So I think when you get into inflation and everything else, I think it's going to be really hard and like you said, it's going to put burden on the property owner.
Okay.
And I do want to note that several of the pools that are over the CCCL, right now, we've spoken with some of the property owners, and some of them have already told us, we don't need any repairs. All we need to do is clean it and repaint it, and we're good to go.
Excellent.
And that would not be considered repair. That's not a permit they even have to get from us. So if they didn't have to get a permit from the town, we wouldn't consider that a repair.
Okay. Sarah, do you need any other clarifications?
I don't believe so.
Okay. The public hearing is closed. May I have a motion to to forward those recommendations on to the council that have been discussed with staff today relative to the EC zoning district changes?
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion by Don Sudduth and seconded by Doug Eklund. Is there any further discussion on this? All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. The next item, I am going to step out of the room. This is actually a variance for a fence at my house. So I'm going to step out of the room. Kara Stewart will be doing the presentation. And Jane, there you go. If you all need to ask me a question, I'll be outside.
Okay, we're going to have, oh, sorry. The variance request to section 34-1744B-1 to increase the fence height 34-1742C, allowing chain link fence in the front yard, and 34-3131B, limiting obstruction in visibility triangle. Town will present.
Okay,
Go ahead.
could I
Oh, sure.
make my quick statement here? Zoning revision, special exceptions, and variances are all quasi-judicial in nature, which requires that our public hearing to comply with procedural requirements established in Florida law and in our land development code. Quasi-judicial proceedings are less formal than proceedings before a circuit court, but are more formal than the remainder of our meeting, and follow basic standards of due process requiring certain notices, application of the correct standards, and decisions made on competent substantial evidence presented to the LPA in written documents or oral testimony. The LPA will evaluate the testimony and information for this item and draw a conclusion regarding whether the criteria in the Land Development Code or state law as may be applicable has been satisfied. Pure speculation or mere opinion not based on competent facts cannot be legally considered by the LPA in evaluating an agenda item. Testimony by professionals who are qualified as experts in a particular area is considered competent evidence by the Florida courts, as well as testimony by neighbors and residents who have fact-based information such as minutes, surveys, engineering reports, etc., or testimony based on personal information. If you intend to speak, please keep this in mind. When you come forward, please state your name clearly for the record, whether or not you've been sworn in, and your qualifications or interest in the matter. Does any LPA member have a conflict of interest other than the chair who has already left the room?
No conflict.
No.
None.
No
Okay.
conflict.
Okay, and does anyone have any ex parte communication to disclose?
I drove by the property this morning just to look at it.
No ex parte communication.
I've had conversation with Anita about the property.
I received an email from Ms. Stewart offering to do a site visit, but I didn't take her up on the offer.
I received an email from Ms. Stewart, and I'm very familiar with the property.
No ex parte, just very familiar with the property.
Okay, go ahead. You've been qualified as an expert.
That is correct. My name is Jason Smalley. I'm with the town's Planning and Zoning Office and Community Development. Morning, LPA members and staff members. Good to see everybody. Today, as was mentioned, there is a request for a variance. The variance is actually 3 separate asks. I will quickly go over them, and if there are any questions, myself and the applicant's representative are here for questions or conversation. So the initial ask includes a request to increase the maximum fence height in the front street area or the front 25 feet of a property from a maximum 4 feet in height on residential properties to 6 feet in height to bring it back to the state of a fence that existed pre-storm. The second ask is a request to allow chain link fence material, which is limited in residential areas, again, in the front 25-foot or street setback area. The request is to allow for chain link to go at 19 feet
into that setback area. And that would require a variance just for the material in that area. Lastly, a request is being made to allow for the fence and the fence posts to be into what is known as the site triangle or site visibility triangle. These are triangles that are generally added or analyzed for fences or other structures or obstructions that would be going into areas where a driveway allows for ingress or egress off of a public street. So those are the three questions at hand. Staff has presented you with their analysis of it. The recommendation was for denial specifically because we couldn't assess the assertion of safety in that area. We can't, in the report, it states that there have been no known vehicle or pedestrian interaction, negative interactions over the time that the applicant has owned that. Staff just couldn't validate couldn't validate that in the office. And so that was the general reason for our denial in the staff report. If there are any questions from the members, again, I'm here, and then the representative for the applicant is here as well.
I have, my first question is, when I see the pictures of the, what was there before, it's not a chain link fence. Why is it, why the chain link fence?
So there's a return that is perpendicular to the roadway. There's about a 6-foot return that is white PVC fencing. Connected to that is the chain link. It may be difficult to see, but it's obscured by some of the landscaping material that was there. So the applicant had sent us a justification for this. She mentioned that the PVC being shaded out and encompassed by this landscaping material tends to mold and get stains on it. And that's why she had chosen the chain link previously. And then it was also to ensure that her neighbor wouldn't be looking at a stained and moldy fence because of the landscaping shading.
I mean, when I think of imagine a chain link fence, it's kind of industrial, but you can get vinyl coated or enhanced chain link fences that are more.
Absolutely. The aesthetics have been addressed through PVC or plastic covered chain link fence. And when in my discussion with the applicant, she has said that she is going to be using that material to replace the chain link that was there if given approval.
6 feet's pretty high too. Why 6 feet? Security?
I apologize. So the applicant had explained it that she has a pool. Well, I guess I should mention the staff report is incorrect on one part. I was corrected in that the applicant was afforded or was not afforded a variance for her pool. Her pool is actually on the side of the house and does not protrude forward of the primary structure. But the main point was to obscure the pool since it is in direct line with the front. She was just using that for privacy and then to separate the yard from the right of way. Yes, sir.
Jason, my question was, with our downtown and redevelopment districts, we have built 2 lines of, let's say, 5 feet. And I guess the code, and as a town, we de facto assume that it creates a safe merge onto Estero if you have an access point, because you can have a building up to 5 feet and you're still allowed to have driveways there. So can't we make the same assumption here that we've got 5 feet of clearance, just like a build 2 line would have downtown, and it's a local street with slow moving traffic, therefore it's not unsafe? Does that seem reasonable to you?
So I think I have 2 comments about that. So first of all, the building would still need to meet the, the building would still need to meet the visibility triangle. So at those intersections there, we would still ask that the buildings be slightly angled so that at the end, or excuse me, at where the intersection is, it would leave a dog ear, if you will. This is pretty standard in my experience in other communities. Some people call it different things, but there's always this idea that it allows for just a little bit of space where nothing should be into at that intersection there, just to be able to see oncoming traffic. More to your point about the difference in a downtown area right on Estero and the difference between an internal street, I think that's a valid point, and that was the point that the applicant had brought up, is that we're talking about an area that is lower traffic. The pedestrian traffic is going to be somewhat limited because, as mentioned in the staff report, there are no sidewalks on Jefferson, so you wouldn't be encouraging people to encouraging pedestrians to be walking down those streets when somebody's entering or leaving. Whether or not the 5 feet that is provided with the swale area or that right-of-way area between where the applicant's property begins and between the roadway, that little green strip there, I think there can be an argument made that that serves the same purpose as the 5-foot area, but staff is just applying the code as it was written.
One last question, and it's loosely related, not substantive to this, but so was the applicant charged for 3 variances or 1 variance? One variance.
Three variances. I believe the total was $2,800 total.
Okay, thanks.
I can also verify that the property has had this fence since at least 2007, based on previous MLSs where you could see the fence line. And I actually sold this property to Anita as a realtor in 2010, and it was existing at that point. And so I think that the length of time that this has been there and not caused any issues for the triangle. In fact, the neighbor's yard landscaping sticks out further in the view triangle than Anita's fence. Seems, and also the neighbor's driveway is on the other side of her property, so it's not really an issue for her coming out because she has another 50 feet over to where she comes out. Proves that it is hasn't been an issue in the past. I'm just stating that. Anybody else have any comments for the staff? Don?
No comment.
Jim? Anybody have comments down there?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Kara is representing for the applicant.
Good morning, members. My name is Kara Stewart, representing Anita Saracita for the variance at 185 Jefferson. As far as the town attorney's question, as far as being a witness or a qualified applicant, I worked with Lee County for approximately 17 years and have been involved with the town of Fort Myers Beach Land Development Code and permitting processes since approximately 1998 through today. Worked at the county for 17 and a half years, then came to Fort Myers Beach and was the community development director for approximately 3. So based on that, I feel that I can provide some testament. The variance at hand.
Would y'all please take a vote to qualify her as an expert?
Okay, those all in favor of qualifying her as an expert, say aye.
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 No nays?
You can qualify.
Unanimous.
Thank you. The variance at 185 Jefferson, I think we need to take a step back when we look at it and look at the property. At this point, that house has been on this street since 1926. It has been maintained to the level that it is today. It's undergoing some repairs from Hurricane Ian. Unfortunately, the fence has gone away with the storm, just like so many other things. The property is also unique in that it doesn't really share a rear yard for any kind of outdoor entertainment. So therefore, the property is developed really in the front, hence the request for the 6-foot fences. The historical element of the comp plan encourages us to do just that, to maintain historical structures and repair them. Although the fence is not a historical structure, it's integral to the property for the character of the gingerbread effect that that house has and the style of fencing that has been there for at least at least we know back to 2000 from the aerials that we've seen. We have heard people tell us that it's been there since 1974. Requires a lot of maintenance over time, and therefore that fence has been there in that length of time. The fence itself has been acknowledged by the town. In 2014, the owner had requested a fence permit, and at that time, the town acknowledged the existence of the fence and allowed it to be repaired. Subsequent to that, in 2018, the applicant contemplated installing a pool, which, as we've discussed, is on the side yard, but it's really street facing and creating that usable space in the front. Once again, town staff acknowledged the existence of this 6-foot fence, and they're using it as the pool barrier that is required on this property. The owner at that time, of course, because of the outdoor space that's been created over these years, has been accentuating that area as her outdoor living area. I want to bring up a side digression a second in relationship to the comp plan. The comp plan allows us, in instances where we've had a disaster, to bring back our living space at the same square footage that we had, albeit it's interior. This request is really no different, except that it's an outside space. It's our usable outside space. We're looking to just go back to what has been used for at least, as we know, 30, 40, 50 years. So the request is not necessarily a new request to that property as much as it's a replacement. The staff's comment is right in relationship to the visibility triangle. We don't feel that that has quite as much bearing, because if we look at the length of time that fence has been there, there has not been any incident there. The owner, we have one owner that goes in and out of that property, is familiar with her ingress and egress. And once we have that repetitive action, someone gets more accustomed to it. The ingress, egress, visibility triangles are typically something that when we think about a sterile boulevard, or we think about the transient individual coming and going and not being as familiar. So the fact that the owner is the one traversing this visibility, we feel that that is not an issue anymore. It's kind of like we can equate it to traffic light. A four-way street has a traffic light or it has a stop sign, depending on the amount of traffic. Therefore, we feel like we're in a good position to deal with our visibility triangle and get that positive reaction. The security is also an issue for this owner on that street. The street has consistently been short-term rental on some of the properties. So again, just to be able to afford a little bit more security to that owner is very important. The one other comment was that this, in relationship to our chain link fence on the side property line, in addition to the maintenance and the mold that was mentioned previously, we are also looking forward to bringing back some landscaping. The landscaping on the interior of the lot will survive and be able to be, what is the word I'm looking for, healthier if it is not blocked by something solid along that side. So the chain link was really given some consideration and thought it was the best option for the neighbor and the current property owner. The last thing we'd like to comment on is in relationship to condition 2, if in fact this does go forward for approval. The proposed condition 2 on the resolution talks about if there's an alteration, if there is substantial damage, substantial improvement, if we get this approved, that would go away if this property has an alteration. Just like your previous conversation just now about repair and whatnot, we feel that's a very ambiguous item to include in a resolution. We're not opposed necessarily to the substantial improvement, substantial repair, but to say that if we alter this property, if we alter this residence, this variance goes away is really very, very subjective. This is an old structure. The house, as I mentioned, is almost 100 years old. It's going to need, at some point, some repairs and alterations. I went and I looked up definitions of the word repair. you get many different definitions of what a repair is. I went to the building code, I went to the dictionary. It's very ambiguous. We would request that that condition be adjusted going forward as well if we do get approval for the variance at council. That being said,
I
I'm
have a
here to answer.
question. In that repair statement, would that include something like, I mean, she is raised off the ground, but if she should choose to bring it up to, FEMA standards, would that alter it and they would have to then remove it? I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. I
That's
mean,
our
that
question.
would be the biggest consideration she would probably consider doing,
Right.
would be if she would in the future decide to raise her house.
Correct.
So
Raise
that-
it, repair it, a window gets broken, we're replacing a window. Is that an alteration? What is the alteration? So that was
is-
a little bit of a
That's
conflict. And,
confusing.
yeah, raising the house, anything. It's left very vague and open, difficult to deal with. I'm going to mention one other thing too. I just thought of in relationship to the height of the 6-foot fence. The property, and as I mentioned, is being used for her outdoor entertainment area. If you look back on aerials, prior property owners have done the same thing. There's tables in some of the aerials, there's chairs prior to Ms. Saracita owning the property. There's a little bit of a grade change between her pool deck and the front of the property, probably about a 2.5-foot difference. So if you imagine, if we don't have a 6-foot barrier, you're standing on her pool, someone like me, I'm about 5'9", my entire body, from my knees up will be on display. So it really is something that we're looking to be able to ensure the continued use of it. Any questions?
Do you have empirical evidence that a short-term rental street is more dangerous than a long-term rental street?
I don't, and it's not about danger. It's just about her privacy. It's just privacy.
What's the difference between a short-term rental and a long-term rental street with regards to privacy? Do you have empirical data that
I
even
don't have
supports that?
empirical. No, I do not.
Okay, so your contention there is totally subjective. Is that
It's
correct?
subjective to the point that the vested ownership for a homesteaded property is, and the assumption maybe that is being made is that the camaraderie that's created
Mhm.
when we have neighbors that know each other is different from a transient. That's all.
Yeah, because
not-
as a vacation rental manager,
Yeah.
you're getting down a slippery slope if you're saying that because it's a short-term street, you should have more privacy, more security. You're opening up a big can of worms there with that.
I don't think I'm trying to say that. I think what I'm trying to say is it's more of the neighborhood and knowing your neighbors and hanging out with your neighbors and just having that environment versus transient. That's all. Not anything saying they're more dangerous. If I implied that, that is not the implication
You
at
didn't
all.
imply, but it's just saying that a short-term rental street, that's one of your reasons. I find that highly subjective. And, I've lived on long-term streets
Mhm.
and I don't think they're any less safe than the other streets. I mean, I just find that it's a tough thing you're saying there.
I think it's more for her privacy,
Okay.
from knowing the people, knowing your neighbors. That's really what we're trying to say.
I have a question, maybe can be answered. So the 5-foot dimension, what would that have to be increased to eliminate the problem of the view triangle? If it was 8 feet, would there be the adequate view triangle?
The visibility triangle is 5 foot perpendicular back to the road, so it would be a 5-foot increase.
So the 5-foot would have to be 10 foot?
Correct. So we're saying that 5 foot that's between the property line and the street
Mhm.
is affording that same 5 foot.
Because I think the one thing that sounds a little, I know they haven't had an accident in the past, but that's not a good way to look at things.
Well-
because, just because it didn't happen before doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. But I just wondered if there was an easy way to resolve the view triangle.
An interesting concept is on Old San Carlos. the visibility triangle does not come into play. So on Old San Carlos, there is an exception to those structures for the visibility triangle because of the sidewalk, the width of the sidewalk. So it's no different than there. If anything, there's more traffic down there than there would be on Jefferson.
Just curious with respect to the, I assume there's going to be foliage or hedge or something that's going to be planted along the fence?
Oh, absolutely. She'll be
That's the only way you
recreating her
create
lush
privacy with a
landscaping.
chain link, right?
Correct.
Right. So
Correct.
it's not so much the fence, it's the fence being a barrier for access to the property, and the foliage will be what is actually creating the privacy. Am I correct?
And the foliage will be on the inside of the
On
fence.
the inside of her fence,
So it
correct.
won't be adding to that visibility. All right. Any other questions for the applicant?
Yes, Ms. Stewart, with regards to condition number 2, would you be amenable to putting language where repairs and maintenance shall be allowed, and that maybe and Jason, I'd ask you to chime in on this, using the term reconfiguration will nullify it. So to me, reconfiguration is, we generally show on the site plan where it should be. If you move it completely, and that to me, that's reconfiguration. That would nullify your variance. But maintenance and repair seems appropriate.
So if I'm following you, you're suggesting we say maintenance and repair is okay, is allowed. Just if we
Reconfiguration would not be.
reconfiguration, we have to then readdress the
Yeah.
fence, is what you're proposing?
That's conditions of approval,
Page number?
page 35 and 99.
Okay, thanks. My thing just.
To answer the
jumped all over
question,
the
yes.
place.
I believe that would be more suitable.
Okay, any other questions?
Just one other quick question. I show the diagram shows a wood deck that looks like it goes to the fence. Is that correct?
No.
No?
There's a pool deck that's there that has been put in since 2018.
Okay. And is it in the setback or no?
I'm
It's-
sorry?
Does it go to the setback? Because it looks like where it says wood deck, there's no edge to it. The edge
Let me
looks like
take
it's
a
on the
look
property. I'm
right
looking at,
It actually goes to the front of the house and it
Right.
goes back.
okay. Okay. So where it says wood deck on the diagram in the
Right.
package, it's not really a wood
It
deck?
it is squared with the properties.
Okay. Oh, okay. The arrow. Okay. Gotcha. Yep.
We also have three
Actually,
letters.
Sorry. Apologies. Yeah, I see it.
We also have 3 letters from the neighbors that we had provided. I think they came in too late, so we have some letters of support of the neighbors on that street as well.
Any negative
No,
comments?
no,
Okay, any other things for the applicant? Any other questions?
Thank you.
Sarah. So we'll bring it, so public comment. Anyone like to speak on the property in question? No requests. We'll close public comment. Back to the table. Discussion here?
Nothing for discussion.
Not this time.
Just want to indicate that I'll support the variance. I just would recommend that we change condition number 2 and put some language in there about allowing for repair and maintenance. And instead of using, can't remember what the term is, alteration, that we talked about reconfiguring. Reconfiguring the fence would nullify the variance.
Okay, I support that also. Go ahead.
You have specific language that you're suggesting to change number 2?
I would ask staff if they've got something that they'd like to propose to us along the lines of allowing for repair and maintenance, and then removing the alteration and putting reconfiguration.
So I don't have a problem changing the terminology there and tightening it up to ensure that it's apparent that the recommendation from LPA is to allow for maintenance, upkeep, minor repairs of individual pickets, for instance, things of that nature, but anything more intense, up to including reconfiguration, would require a new approval.
And to verify that the repairs and things like that don't have anything to do with the house itself.
No, we can make it apparent just by adding language pointing to the fence to
Mhm.
ensure that we're not talking about standard repairs or
Right.
even, as you had mentioned, the elevation of a home, that
Right.
wouldn't affect the approval of the fence if you so choose to do that.
The current language covers that. It
Yeah.
does say
It
shall
does say
apply
fence.
to the fences.
Yeah.
So,
Does that?
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Anything else? All right, we'll bring it. Is anybody ready to make a motion?
I'll move it, Sudeth.
With the,
To grant the variance for the fence with the conditions set out. Number one, homeowner shall plant a buffer to obscure at least 19 linear feet of the chain link fence on the east side within the front 25-foot or front yard setback area. And then two, variance shall only apply to the fence.
and allow the town to
Yeah.
make the changes to that.
And allow the town to make the changes noted with respect to alterations or repairs. Does that cover it, Patrick?
Yep.
Okay.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Anyone? Passes unanimously. Can't talk. We can have Anita come back into the room. Thank you. Guess we can move to the section C, amendment to the administrative setback variance requirements to clarify the criteria required for cottage lot administrative variances.
Madam Chair, or
Yes.
may I just make a comment before we move on to this item?
Sure.
Just going back to a question I had asked Jason Smalley about the number of variance fees that we charge.
Mhm.
So in my mind, this is one fence. It's one condition that we're trying to cure or address. And while it triggers multiple code sections associated with that one fence, I see it as one variance. And I think in fairness to our residents, that should be one fee. And maybe we have something where if one issue triggers multiple code sections, maybe it's a greater fee than the basic one, but hitting people with a fee for every single code section, to me, is going overboard. And I think we should create relief, and we should send that to council and ask council to look at that and see what their pleasure is.
Just as one point of clarification, so that we have numbers in front of us, the initial fee for the first ask is $1,800, regardless of what section. For each additional one, it would be it's $500 per ask. So that's how we got up to that $2,800 number. Just so we have numbers to talk about here.
Thanks.
Congratulations, you got your fence.
Thank you. I wanted to, just for the record, I should have said so before I left, disclose that I did fill out the conflict form,
Interest.
so it's on file with the thing. Okay, are we moving on to the next
Yes,
item?
I've already addressed that. She is up there to speak.
Okay.
Good morning, Sarah Probst with Community Development. Several months ago, Town Council adopted language that would allow certain administrative variances. The focus of that ordinance was, at that time, was primarily on the cottage lots. Since that time, staff has recognized an error in the language that requires all administrative variances to meet the criteria that should apply only to the cottage square or the cottage lots. That includes the square footage of the footprint of the previously constructed home, and it may only be a single story. That specific criteria was only intended to apply for the cottage lots for administrative variances. The language before you today clarifies that the square footage and single story are only applicable to the request for administrative variance to rebuild a cottage on a non-conforming lot. Please provide any feedback or recommendations to council.
Okay. Doug, do you have any comments on this?
No, ma'am.
How about you, Jim?
No comment.
Jane?
I agree that that's what we had stated, and what has become the problem with how we stated it?
So it is that the way it was put together, that requirement applied to all of the listed administrative
Mhm.
variances that you can
Oh,
request.
Okay, I'm
So
sorry.
we
just
wanted,
a
yeah, we
cottage.
just wanted
Okay.
to clarify that that specific one doesn't apply to those other things.
Okay, thank you. No comment.
Patrick?
I do have a comment, and it's not directly associated with that. It's related from the fact that when we did make the changes, there was language added to the ordinance that also addresses minimum use determinations.
Mhm.
Okay, and at least from my recollection, we didn't really have a substantive discussion about adding that language at the hearing. And same thing a little bit with the variances. By having that language in here, someone comes in for administrative variance. And again, the administrative variance, especially for the cottage lots, is a recognition that people have vested rights and they can build back post-disaster. And we are creating some relief in that we're allowing them to go through this administrative variance rather than go through a public hearing. So we acknowledge that there was a home there, it washed away, someone's trying to rebuild it. Again, charging an extra $350 for a minimum use determination on top of that, when it could be done as part of that administrative variance review, to me would be, again, a much nicer thing to do to our residents. And I think you could take the administrative variance section or application, put a box there, say, is your lot non-conforming? Yes. Are you requesting a minimum use determination as part of this variance request? Yes. And again, not charge or not create a separate application and a separate fee. So just a comment, and again, I'm bringing it up because it was inserted in that document when it was updated. So that's why I'm bringing it up.
And the reason that it was inserted is because that is how the town verifies that a lot is a legally non-conforming lot.
Yeah.
So the minimum use determination was a process that was previously used. So that's sort of how we tied it back to proving that aspect.
And I don't have a problem with the process whatsoever. I understand the need for it. I just, in my mind, it can be done through that application. So, and I'd like people to understand that we have a comp plan, a land development code, again, that was created to keep the status quo. And if you consider that the average lot on this island, let's say, is 50 by 100, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's even smaller than that, and the standard density is 4 units per acre on many of those areas. From a density standpoint, right away, those lots are all non-conforming across the board. So everybody must then go through the minimum use determination. And again, we're not telling, we're having people that just lost their home have to verify and almost prove to a certain extent that they had an existing home there. When we created a land development code and a comp plan, that made them non-conforming. So again, let's create a little relief here. We've got so many people, we're gonna have hundreds of people come in for building applications, variances. We could just build that into the process. So I think there's a need for it. I think we just can streamline it.
You're talking about more than just cottage lots.
Yeah.
You're talking about across the board, small lots.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
So would you guys like to see a change to the language in the minimum use determination section, or would you just like to see if we can amend the processes?
amend the
I was thinking
process.
more of the process, just
Okay.
again, if you apply for a building permit for a variance, administrative variance, that could just be a checkbox as part of that
Mhm.
application.
Okay, we can talk with staff and see, how we can coordinate it, internal through the community development department.
It's a great idea, Patrick. Scott, anything?
I totally agree. Anything that we can speed up the process and get people to rebuild their homes, I'm all for, especially administratively.
And Dawn, any comments?
Yeah, exactly what Scott just said.
Okay,
And the standalone minimum use determination application would apply to a lot that's never been built on. Or
Mhm.
for example, if you have two platted lots where you used to have one building across those two lots, someone wants to tear that down and create and build two different homes and go back to these were platted lots. I mean, yes, you go through that formal application. But again, when there's another permit already in place, I think we can combine it.
Okay, and for clarification, because people do try to submit for a variety of different things, a minimum use determination is only for a single family lot.
correct.
So it's not to get more than one unit.
No,
Correct.
I think Jason Green again, community development, Patrick makes some great points. That's part of the reason that section has been modified over the years. There was an intent originally, if you remember, for some homes properties that were built on, they wouldn't be able to be built on again. But we've alleviated that a little bit to make sure that lots of record. The biggest thing for us on reviews is making sure that what somebody wants to build on matches what they had. So that's the hardest part. So if it's lot 12 of a plat, that's a pretty simple thing. And I think we can make that adjustment, whether it's non-conforming or not. It's when the legal description changes. If you had lot 12 and now you've got 3/4 of lot 12, or if you had lot 12 and half of lot 13, and then that's changed. And we're seeing a lot more of that. Unfortunately, those lines are shifting. That's where I think we get into let's be cautious and not create more density, or somehow that row, you're familiar with that street all of a sudden has 18 homes on it instead of 17 homes on it from before. So that's the biggest thing for us, is to make sure that those, because we're checking legal descriptions all the time, trying to catch some of those, because unfortunately, there's been a lot of lines moving around magically, how that happens. But the other ones are pretty simple, and that can streamline some of that. That's a good point.
thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments on the administrative setback variances? To me, it was pretty straightforward. Thank you, Sarah. This is a public hearing. I'll open up for any comments. Any comments from anyone in the audience? Thank you very much. The public hearing is closed. Do we wish to incorporate Patrick's comments into our motion to forward on as a recommendation to the
I think
council?
so.
Yes.
Okay, Don, would you like to make a motion?
Or I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
I'll second the motion.
Well, he hasn't made it yet, Jane. But good to be on the spot.
Thank
I
you.
move to accept accept the recommendation with the amendments mentioned by Patrick with respect to the
MUD being a
Totally.
part of the application process.
amending the application process.
Right.
Thank you, Jane.
Second.
Okay, the motion is
process.
made by Don and seconded by Jane. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I think it's a great move
Here-
and will streamline the time frame and expenses for the public.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, any other discussion? Is there any objection to the motion? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Next item is our first meeting to discuss comprehensive plan elements for transmittal. Does anyone wish to take a quick break before we move into this?
I do.
Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
all right. We'll take a 10-minute break. It's 10:31 and we'll reconvene our meeting. The next section is, it's meant for, I asked Jason and Sarah, this next section is really meant for a preliminary discussion. We'll be following up with this again in October. So it's just to get some kind of big picture ideas and thoughts across to the consultants and our staff. And it has to do with two elements of the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, and the housing element.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, still Jason Green, Community Development. I'm going to actually ask as we move forward with this, and I'll kind of explain a little bit what our thoughts are on the process. You guys can have that feedback. But I would say more than preliminary. I would push and say
More than preliminary.
Let's
okay.
we're not adopting anything. Obviously, today you're not making any specific.
Mhm.
We want recommendations, right? We're at a
Okay.
point where this thing needs to move
Well,
forward.
good.
These are the first two elements because they're probably, I would say, almost the most important to get right since it's land use and housing. But what we want come October for you for the next meeting is give you that 30 days to roll your sleeves up and let's get this language hammered out, right? This isn't just more concepts. It's let's decide where we're going. Let's give us feedback. We can make some changes. And then in October, I hope that we can have something that's ready potentially or within a few weeks after that to be ready if necessary to go to a public hearing with the council. Ideally, each of these, it's a challenge with these comp plans because there's so much, and there's so many elements. I would like to, in a perfect world, each month, as you're deciding on what you just had 30 days to review, that you're also getting a new 2 or 3 elements. So
Jason, I'm going to stop you there.
Okay.
We have not had 30 days to review this, and
No.
it would be nice to have 30
you
days.
do,
to
you will
review.
have 30 days. So this
Okay.
is the intro. So the process that I thought would be best, and please correct me if you want the different process, is we give this to you. We have a meeting and talk about it. Like we're going to have a presentation today. And then you have 30 days till your next meeting to really know everything you want.
Excellent.
And as those decisions and final decisions, hopefully in October being made, we're introducing
The next section.
the next set. So then you have another 30 days to November to review those.
Okay.
That gives us about 4 months, essentially. It's a lot and it's going to be a cycle. So we want to make sure that you're okay with it. And we have to pause. That's fine too. I know Sarah has a couple words.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we don't expect you to have all of the answers today. We know you have not had it that long. If you have first thoughts, that's what we want to get through today. You know, if you see things that you feel that you have already said, no, we don't want this, whatever that is. But we do expect that you will have something to say on the next round. We don't expect you to say, okay, we've looked at it for 30 days, move it on to the next one, move it on to town council. If you are ready for that, we're really happy with that. But we do want to have those final suggestions at that meeting so that the consultant will have time to make those changes, and then we can get it onto the town council.
Thank you, Sarah.
So the other way is you could hand out everything and then, or groups, and then you have 30 or 60 days at a time, and then we discuss it. We just thought about discussing it initially and then doing the deep dive for the next meeting was probably the best way to do it. But if through this process you want to change it, please let us know.
Thank you.
And like Sarah said, we would love specifics. If you have something that needs to be changed and you have the idea of how it should be, great. But by October, we really want to have that.
Jason, just one procedural question I had a note to ask you was whether or not you have distributed this to the town council?
No, I mean, so this has been ongoing for a couple of years at this point, and they've had versions of this. This recent version they have not had.
So
We're back before you to kind of roll our sleeves up and wordsmith and try to hopefully get something that we can then have that distributed to council.
My thought process was I think it would be very helpful if the town council received these at the same time we received them. So
Okay.
if there was something that one of them had a concern about or that we had a concern about, we could be speaking back and forth as the process moves forward so that it doesn't all just go plump on their plate.
No, I get that. I think we've actually done that for the last 6 months. I would say that there's been a lot of adjustments to FAR and some other items that was spoke about during the spring and all that. And so that's why we end up at this point where, at some point, the conceptual back and forth, we need to put it on paper and it needs to be read and we need to start wordsmithing it. So I think we've incorporated a lot of those changes to your exact point over the last, I'd say 6 months that's happened. And we can continue to do that too. Yes, but at some point, all of this has to be on a public meeting for you to make a recommendation to move forward to the council. And then the council, just for the process information, then the council obviously make a vote of whether to transmit it to the state.
Yep.
Then the state has a review process. Then it comes back with what they call an ORC report, objections, recommendations, and let's see, changes or whatever it is. I can't, ORC. And then that's where we then come back for what they call an adoption hearing. And so changes can happen up until then. Once the state has come back, we want to make the changes they recommend. I don't recommend that we make big policy changes at that point. We want to kind of get the big policy answers done before the transmittal. Because once you start swinging in a policy, to, big picture issues, that makes the state have another review essentially. So.
Okay, well, to simplify my thought process, I'm just going to request that when it is distributed to us, sections like this, that the same thing that's distributed to us is distributed to the council members saying, this is what the LPA is going to be reviewing at their next meeting.
That's right.
Just so they know.
Absolutely. We can do that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
All
Thanks.
right.
And then, so turn it over to the consultants and
Thank you, Jason.
let them talk to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joe Cordino. I'm with the Cordino Group. I'm the president. I just wanted to introduce myself. Eddie Ning has been working with you closely over the months. So I just
Nice
wanted
to meet you.
Yeah, very nice to meet you all. And I understand I'm actually the mayor of my town in Pinecrest, which is on the east coast of Florida. So I kind of understand what you all are going through. Not quite as difficult. I've never done anything quite as difficult as what you must be going through. So I do have a sense of the complexities and the level of leadership that it takes to get through a process like not only comp plan, but in the situation you're in. I think we're moving through this quite well. And I think what we've done since our last meeting in the spring is get a handle on the bulk of the issues. Last time I think you all met, there was a bit of a lack of consensus. I think we got 80-90% of that knocked out. And I think we can now get down to the hard part of this, which is presenting our recommendations as professionals from listening to what you all have told us, and then you guys fighting out the other 10 or 15% to find a consensus on some of the more complicated issues. And just like we said earlier, I think this is the best way to go through it. Give it to you in small bites. You introduce it, ask some preliminary questions now, digest it for 30 days, come back and then finish it up and wordsmith it out, and then keep the ball rolling like that. It's about time to start doing that. So with that, I'll give it to Eddie so he can do the presentation. I'm here for any questions that you have, and we're looking forward to really getting through the hard part of this, which is right now, and getting this thing moving. So thank you all very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you for having me back. It's been a while. Now, following up our prior discussion, we really had to go back with staff to try to navigate the item. We had comments ranging from, for example, we want these nodes to be peaks and also spread out, in a gradient to zero over the same time. With you can't have a peak go to zero and then also have another peak right there. So we had to navigate those kind of inconsistencies in direction the best we could, and give you something that was just kind of a formal a recommendation. So within the packet, what we're asking you to review over the next month before we come back in October is the future land use map. And I'll go more into these in detail, especially the mixed use district boundaries. We went ahead, we changed back the FAR to what the town originally had, as was requested in the joint meeting. These also include aspects of density and building height, which we're actually providing text that provides for you to handle that at the LDR level, so that you don't have to go back to the comprehensive plan each time. And this is also important in light of the new legislation with Live Local. It's going to make it a little bit more nimble for you all to address any concerns you may have in the future on that. We also added consideration.
Could you explain that?
Yes, the Live Local Act is it's a piece of legislation that took effect in July of this year that really addresses affordable housing. So in short, it is a preemptive act by the state where a developer can opt in with 40% affordable housing, meeting their criteria, and kind of recompense for that, so to speak, for lack of a better word. There are certain things that that you can't restrict them on. That is height and density in particular. You can still, however, regulate on the other aspects such as setback, facade, concurrency, and so forth.
Eddie, isn't the Live Local Act only for unincorporated counties versus local municipalities?
No, it applies to local municipalities as well as counties as well. There are two separate sections within the act itself that govern each one, and the texts written are parallel to each other.
Yeah, I think that the scary part of Live Local is that the applicants, if they come in under, I think it's 40% affordable housing, can avail themselves of the highest density in the municipality and the highest height allowed within a mile. And so that kind of puts, that kind of opens Pandora's box when it comes to those types of developments, particularly when you start to change heights and densities. And a lot of the planners think that there are nuances in there, and it may sort itself out legally in the legal system.
Yeah, there's a lot of angst about that right now. I had to present on this topic at the APA annual conference last week, and let's just say it was standing room only and 20 people in the hallway waiting to get in because it's such a salient issue that we're talking about with this topic right now with Live Local. There are certain things that we do want to make sure that we set you up for in terms of being able to be nimble from a land development regulation standpoint as well, because while you can't regulate from a density or height standpoint, you can regulate everything else. Like I mentioned, facade, setback being the most important aspect. There are certain aspects of use that are kind of preempted as well, but you're going to see less of that because you really don't have as much on the industrial and commercial side. And from the commercial side, the working waterfront are protected under the Live Local Act. But I'll also talk about the marinas in a little bit as well, based on the feedback that we've got. We also added in consideration, based on your discussion items and your feedback to us, on and subsequent conversations that we had with staff about what your decision has been on ground floor parking. I'll go over a little bit of the tech that we are recommending at this point to allow you to provide for consideration of not counting ground floor parking as part of the FAR within your LDR, if that is the choice you want to proceed with. Of course, there are aspects of updates back to relating back to build back policy, housing affordability and attainability, workforce housing bonuses. We took out the conservation land use item and kept the wetland as requested. So we do note that the state usually does comment on this as an objection. They do want you to consider using conservation as its own land use category and having certain elements. However, because that's the direction we received from the joint meeting, that is what we have gone ahead and provided back to you in the draft format that you will see. And of course, I'm gonna, even though we know that it hadn't been delivered to you, there are 2 or 3 things on the transportation element that I wanted to highlight that we've already drafted that are kind of related to some of the issues that we understand you have in the future land use element, particularly the beach views and so forth, as well as a future development. So in the slides, we'll go over that as well, just because it's very salient to the discussion, right? First, you'll see from I know it's small on the screen, and I apologize. We do have printouts for you, and I will get you a bigger printout if needed, or things that you can blow up on the screen. We'll work with staff to get you a high quality resolution at your request. We took back the instructions that we were given, and we modified pretty much all the districts. You'll find that the area around the public is reduced significantly based on the directive we were given. We clarification on that wasn't entirely clear was we were instructed to keep marina here, but wasn't really clear from the discussion and going back and reviewing the videos like half a dozen times whether we wanted to keep the marina section here or to do it as a subset of the district and the same down in Santini. This is particularly important because as written, the mixed-use district have a different density than the marinas district does at the working waterfront. And so that's where we would like you over the next month to come back to us with a full determination. We know, based on the prior instructions we received to keep this portion, but we really would like a definitive answer on here and here in the northern and southern parts of the island. Any questions on that before I continue talking?
Any questions?
I have a question. I thought that where the women's club was, we wanted a node there. Am I mistaken?
My recollection was recommending a reconfigured node.
Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking the existing marinas on the island, 3, right, would all be part of the marina district with the idea of maybe having a water taxi or something between them sometime in the future. But
right,
that's kind of what
we were happy to go any direction you wish. Rewrite it the way that you wish. We once you have a chance to review over the next month, if we can come to a final consensus in the October meeting, that way we can help you finalize it, get it on paper correctly, and get it codified. I know there are certain things that are coming, particularly in the northern part of the island here that have been under discussion, and that may color that part of the discussion. That's why there also wasn't enough clarity from our part on the direction the town wants to proceed with as well. We'll go back and we'll expand on we'll reintroduce this note then here, if that's the direction, and expand upon it. I believe the alternative then we were looking at expanding it to the northwest.
I thought that. I don't want to speak for the whole entire body here, but that was my recollection, is that area around where the car wash is, where the women's club is, that area was going to be because we had talked about those buildings there are it's a clean slate right there.
Right.
So if there's any place on the island that would be a model for a node, I had thought, correct me if I'm wrong, but I had thought that area would be a good incubation, a good test area for a node. Is my recollection wrong on that?
I thought I remembered the same. Help me, because I'm not remembering Boulevard, because it's showing Boulevard there, and I also see like where the arts,
right,
artists meet down behind the old fire station is also Boulevard. So what? Maybe I'm not remembering what Boulevard is.
Right. I think that art district was retained down here, right, Jason?
Well, the arts district that's where the theater is, but I'm saying
Right.
like where the art, there's a building
It's
behind
off
the
of
old,
Denora.
what's that?
It's off of Denora. on
Right, off of Denora, right. There's an art, I'm not sure what it's called. I can't remember.
Association.
Association, yeah, art
Right.
association, but that's right there in the little or in the boulevard
Right.
zone. I just don't remember what the definition of boulevard is.
So what we can do here is we will go back and we will reconstitute this node right here. What we'll do is we'll take out the mosquito control district property and the women's club and look to designate them as civic because of the different function and the fact that they're probably going to remain there pretty long term. And I think the women's club it might be actually a historic building if I remember, or maybe eligible to be a historic building if it's not designated from what I recall. And we will look to a couple of blocks north here into what is currently the mixed residential to create a viable node. You have to have a certain certain kind of a base amount of land to create a critical core, for lack of a better word, in order for that to be viable. So that's what we're going to look for there.
Yeah, some of that right there in the mixed residential was the little motel. What was the name of it there?
Yeah.
Hideaway Village was right there. What's showing as mixed residential now. So maybe that could be included.
Yeah, I
right?
think you've got Hideaway, Lahaina, and Sandpiper that are all going to be redeveloping.
Right.
So that was the idea is.
Yeah, because the Sandpiper is actually in that mixed residential as well there.
And you've got the women's club and you've got mosquito control. And I think the comments were that women's club and mosquito control were civic or institutional uses. And those should remain. However, other commercial uses, that node could be reconfigured.
Right.
Don, just so you know, the boulevard category is explained on page 82.
Thank you.
It's policy 4B5.
Right. Thanks. And that's where here, when we talk about reduction of these mixed use nodes up here, where the boulevard was brought back, those are reverted to what is existing in order to kind of attempt to create those peaks that we talked about while maintaining gradient. Before we had it different in terms of the gradient. Feedback we got was, hey, we want to do something a little bit different here to have gradient down, create two peaks and just retain the items in between. So that was how we were together interpreting with staff. But if that's not the intent of the point you were making, we're happy to go back and change. But that was kind of how we interpret the direction moving forward, because like I mentioned, we were given both gradient and peak, and they're kind of like looking left and right at the same time. Again, you don't have to answer today. Take a month, look over it, and we're more than happy to adjust with you in October as well. You have something concrete, like, yay, everyone's on board. We're happy to do like with the employment note. Just now, we're happy to go back and change it immediately. But if not, there's time to, mull it in and sleep on it.
Eddie, I think something that would be helpful for everyone also is the comparison to what the future land use map was previously indicated here.
Mhm.
And so in your emails, you should have a copy of that of our existing future land use map, just if you need that for reference.
Okay. I'll defer to staff on that.
Yeah, it's in everyone's
Nice to
emails.
have a
Um,
printout on that.
We do want to note that I already covered wetlands. Yeah, I covered wetlands, right? Yeah. Low density, pretty much the low density pretty much remains the same. Yeah. All right. These are just, I should have gone through this to kind of blows a bit more. You'll see that everything, pretty much everything has been reduced in size in terms of mixed district. This also makes sense to us. The only one that really didn't change was arts and theater, just because it was just a small, narrow strip to begin with. They're just trying to do a main street that it just, everything was on the boulevard already, and it's a limited amount of property. And then it makes sense to reduce that further, especially given the property that actually encompasses, which includes the current theater and so forth.
But is it a current theater? I was under the understanding that it's no longer a theater, nor will it be. Does anyone know?
I heard it was moving to a restaurant.
Yeah, that's what I heard too.
Okay.
So, theater it could be an obsolete thought process.
Right, because it's
Right.
all that's there really is the little commercial building,
Exactly,
Charlie's
exactly.
and the
Yeah.
theater.
And the Astera, so that might be some rethinking. I don't know who,
Mm.
Jane, do you know who, somebody knows somebody there. Maybe we can
I
reach
can
out and
find
find out. Okay.
So maybe within the next month, maybe one of the questions then from us to you that we would like feedback on is whether to retain or remove that. Just because it's not a theater now doesn't mean you couldn't do it.
Sure.
Redo a theater in the future, even to a restaurant theater, or a live entertainment venue that small, like maybe a comedy club or something. Again, prerogative of the town. We're happy to adjust the map that you see appropriate. We just need to know how you would like us to adjust it for you.
We'll find out.
Awesome. All right, Marina. All right, this is what I was speaking about. The mixed use you have currently up to like 2.5 FAR, a certain amount of units, depending on the district, 6 units per acre or 10 with the bonuses. Here, Marina being a working waterfront, we discussed with staff and our recommendation was to provide for just 1 FAR and 4 dwelling units per acre. Jason, I believe that is consistent with some of the other areas that you work with on the coastal region as well. It's also consistent with what I've seen in other island communities, particularly in the Keys. Important aspect of Marina relating back to the Live Local Act as well is that marinas are considered working waterfront. They are protected under that act and pretty much exempt.
This is on page 83, just so everyone knows.
Pardon?
It's on page 83 of our packet, just so
Okay.
everyone knows.
Cool. Thank you.
Mhm.
Other than that, that's probably the most major change we made to the text. It still had the same aspect before that we put into play and some changes about particularly related to its usage at the working waterfront. That was based on directive we had received as well from both LPA and the council on making sure we have that wording about a working waterfront. We do also, you'll see throughout that we've begun to put in specific language saying specific regulations will be placed in land development code. And we know that there will be further discussion down the line, and the town, as it recovers from Ian, is going to need a little bit more nimbleness in how it wants to change the regulations. And you're not going to want to have to go back to the comprehensive plan to change every little thing whenever you need to if something comes along. So we have really discussed with staff to move toward the aspect of looking at putting the bulk of those regulations that you may need in land development code and keeping and really trying to make sure that the comprehensive plan is as overarching as possible. This is particularly well received on the comment earlier on the uses. We try to bring those as much to the categorical aspect, and then in your LDR, you can do the specific restrictions and the regulations in there. We really try to work with staff to be not hyper specific on a lot of these items.
Could I interject something there?
Yeah.
This thought process is something that troubles me.
Mhm.
It troubled me from the very start. The nimbleness that that you refer to with the LDC, I think is great. But I think that there's a reason, not I think, I know that there's a reason that we were specific in our comprehensive plan relative to height and descriptions and things like that. It's because that's what we wanted to achieve. And I think eliminating it from the comp plan to make it more nimble in the LDC opens a door that personally I don't wish to open.
So I think when we talk about nimble, we're talking about uses for the
Okay.
most part. Okay. The council has talked about this concept of pink zones and all these other concepts, other places. You don't need a pink zone. You can deal with that through your zoning. You can deal with that through
Sure.
how are uses allowed? Are they permitted?
Right.
Are they conditional use? Are they, blah, 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 all that. And where are they allowed? That's, I think, the point as far as the uses. We want to allow as many uses as possible in those mixed categories. I just learned a lot about small scale manufacturing is actually a huge impetus to downtown developments.
Mhm.
And you wouldn't think that. You'd think storefronts and activity. And it's really somebody can make earrings and you
Yep.
can go and they're becoming almost like a fishbowl where they're watching them make them and it's becoming a thing and people walk by and then they buy it. And most of their sales aren't coming from there. They're coming from externally and online and other sources. But it's a huge opportunity for small scale commercial and retail, but it's really manufacturing. So those types of things are not typically in your codes. I think that's really what we're talking about is from the use perspective. You don't traditionally see height in your comp plan.
But we have it in ours.
It does, but it doesn't. It talks about it and it says it should be limited unless otherwise not. Right. So the policy that's in there now talks about through the LDC and through the code and through PDs getting more height if you want.
That's very specific.
Okay. So it's not limited. It's not a ceiling in the comp plan now. I think original versions, we kind of incorporated some of that in. And so after all the discussions of being able to be in the moment, depending on the project, instead of, I think that's what Eddie's talking about, is the prescribing it as 3 stories. You can't, there's nothing you can do about it once you say 3 stories. You can say we should be 3 stories and it should be special if it's above that or something like that. But I don't know that you want to limit yourself absolute. That's the point.
I think that's a big discussion.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a discussion where I see both sides of the argument here. And one of the things that I've identified and redlined throughout the document is there are references to this will be addressed in the land development code. So, and I'm old enough where I go back to the day of DCA instead of
Right.
DEO. And
Or whatever it is now.
we used to get banged on the fingers every time we had a self-amending policy.
Sure.
And that's a typical example of a self-amending policy. You state something, but you defer to another code. And if you change that code, that really affects your policy. So your policy, in my mind, what we need to do with these policies is either be silent and deal with it in the land development code, or we set an upper limit or a range.
Right.
So
we don't disagree with that. I think
so
right.
the
Yes.
idea would be you can allow a density range from this to this being your maximum.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean you can get your maximum. You have to request for it. Same thing with height. Height will be capped at this for this district, but here's the standard height.
Right.
Here's the maximum height. But again, don't defer to the land development code because your policy is meaningless.
So that's a local choice on the height, right? Traditionally, you don't see height. FAR, density, you're absolutely right, Patrick. That's, you need those guardrails. You need to say it's, and a lot of communities actually implement minimum densities now to ensure that the investment in infrastructure is seen and all that. But height, FAR, we heard those, or not height, FAR and densities, those are the biggest topics. Height is more of a design component. And so I would say again, I agree with Patrick that if we're going to not regulate height in the comp plan, which I would encourage you not to do, you can if you want to be absolute. But that's what the LDC currently is used for.
And
And you do have height limits in your LDC by zoning district, by area, by all that. And then through other means and processes that we talked about earlier, you can request more and then that's going to be evaluated. Unless I haven't heard anybody all this time say we want to set a height limit in the comp plan. I know we talk about height and scale, but if you want to, that's fine. We can do that.
the other thing that would be nice to clean up as we go through this is the terminology. And I think you guys have gone maybe 80% of the way through on this. Of density is for residential uses. Intensity is for commercial, and we're going to include hotels as part of the intensity.
Right.
And height is a separate issue because we've got sections where we identify it as intensity. Then we talk about height. There's no mention of FAR.
That's right.
So it's either if we call it intensity and we explain that intensity is a combination of height and FAR, I'm okay with that. Or just separate it and have height and have intensity separately.
Right.
Density, height, intensity. Very clear. Try to avoid the overlap.
And I think that's a great point of, that's one of the big conversation points that you don't have to tell us specifically the language today or even October, but if it'd be nice to know where we all, where we're landing on that. Right. So that's kind of the, hopefully that helps with the conversation, but yeah. So
I think it's
currently your
something that's
height.
always confused.
It
Always
is.
confused.
It is. And again, your height, it's to Patrick's point, this is a policy currently in our plan that if you, first time you read it, you would think it limits height. but it really doesn't. It says
I would think
it
that
should be.
99% of people who have lived on Fort Myers Beach
Mhm.
believe that height is limited.
It is
and
limited by the
hope
land
that-
development code. Absolutely. And then traditionally, the council's never approved anything higher than those. And people haven't had the nerve to ask, frankly, through a PD. So it is not a height shall be no more than X. It does not say that in the comp plan. It can. That's a local choice.
Well, I think defining this would certainly help the cases that are going to become before us so that we're not making those decisions case by case, that we would already have a plan, would make it much more clean in what comes at us instead of just pie in the sky because we have no limits.
I don't disagree with you. I just, what we hear from council is we want to be able to discuss and see if a project is special, where's our flexibility, how much can we allow? And then we also hear, we want to have something simple so we don't have to worry about it anymore. That's a local choice. Again, that's a local choice. That's why we're here today ultimately, is because for the last 6 months, 7 months, it's been this kind of, there's no consensus on that issue.
Well, I just think
And
the
so we need
definition
one.
would make it clear for all of us to be able to move forward, because with no definition, we're going, oh, I don't know.
On height,
Well,
are you talking
it's
about height?
not
Yeah, but
just-
that's my point is we hear from other people and council members that they don't want to limit it. They want to be able to decide based on the project. So that's where we're kind of caught in between here.
And that creates great insecurity in the community and great insecurity with developers and investors in our community, because they do not know what the expectation is and they don't know what the definition of special is.
Well, that part I'll agree with you,
Is
yes.
special because it meets, whoever's listening to this, I mean, no disrespect to anyone on this, but because it hits a certain topic that someone is particularly interested in, our goal should be to create security for our residents and predictability for our investors and our business owners, so that
Right.
so that it's clear. Because when somebody asks me, what do you think the town's appetite is for ABC? Or what do you think the town will tolerate for ABC? What I hear, and I have said this to several folks, what I hear is, what do you think I can get away with? And what do I need to give? And that is the wrong way to go about the redevelopment of our island right now. We have one opportunity right now that no one has ever had, and that is essentially to get it really right, because we have almost a blank slate. So what
Right.
do we want? And
Yes.
we need to draw those lines so that everyone knows what to expect, whether you live on Jefferson
it
Street
is.
or whether you're going to redevelop, whatever.
And I think, yes, and Patrick, please chime in, because we've had the FAR height conversation. I know Sarah spoke to you and gave you some examples. And I think height, just to me, height is a little bit different than the other categories, than the other things that we're talking about as far as limitations, only because design matters. And so that's the conversation you have to have. Is there a height that we're comfortable with and that's it no matter what? Or do you want to incentivize other things, such as stacking taller but narrower footprint, so you have more clear space on the sides and bigger setbacks, more
Mhm.
open space? Those are trade-offs that you can require. It's not just a max out the footprint of the site and go up. I think you have to look at both. That's why I would say, I agree with you, it's unknown right through the comp plan, but the comp plan can say, allow higher buildings or taller buildings if certain things are criteria are done and design criteria. That's an important part that I think Patrick was talking about, is you don't automatically get 10 units an acre. You really should talk about, once you hit a certain threshold, then it's a special project. It's got to be a PD. You got to do certain things. And that's what we've talked about over and over again, I think, is getting those, what are those other things that you want in order to potentially get those? And that's what we're missing also, frankly. Do you want more recreation space? Do you want more public access and transportation? Is it workforce housing, affordable housing? Is that what is it? What are those 5 or 6 things that you think allow for those other design ideas? So
Just general concepts here. On the FAR, reading through this, I think it's still unclear if we're going to calculate parking under a building or not.
Correct.
So I think we need to get that resolved.
Absolutely.
Then I guess the question to the town attorney is, if we look at height, for example, as part of this, we've got certain applications that have been submitted. So are they protected under zoning in progress? Or
There hasn't been a zoning in progress ordinance issued for this.
We,
No,
we-
I know what you mean.
but.
Are they protected under the current regulations that they're
Yes.
applied under?
And-
I
and
think the
the
answer is
thing
yes,
is,
right? If they've, if they
I
have an
think-
application today?
You know, my fear is either way we go, wouldn't want to prejudice any application with
No.
some kind of
I got you.
direction, because we've been talking about this for a year. Okay? Shame on us for not getting there any quicker. But now you've got applications that came in. And I don't want us to indirectly regulate their project when we've been asking for direction, the direction hasn't been provided.
Right.
And now we can't prejudice their application as they move forward through the process, in my mind.
So there's kind of two parts to that. I don't want to answer the first one, which is, are they protected in the application process currently? I don't want to, are they under the current plan?
It's everything that y'all are talking about today is very, very new. You haven't come to any conclusions. So people who have already made applications as of today would not be restricted in what you do going forward. If that's,
So
I'll
there,
give
I
you
would
a
say,
specific example.
Well,
okay?
can I
We've got-
answer
We've got
a
a
question about
sentence in
that?
there, but you could talk about that too.
Okay.
So we've got there's a specific sentence in there that says, while height can be regulated on individual projects, the standard story should be 3 stories.
Right.
Okay. What if someone's asking for more than 3 stories today with a current application?
Right.
Okay. When they're going to go to hearing, someone's going to point to that 3 stories.
it's been in
Someone's
there.
going to point to
Right.
it. So in my mind, we got to be very careful about how we change things and the timing of when things get changed.
Right. So I think that goes back to your original point of either put it in or take it out, right? Either
Yeah.
talk about height or don't,
Yeah.
as an example, which I agree with. Some of that language is existing. So that's, when you're updating these things, it gets a little tricky of some of these things are, there's 20-year wounds with some of this stuff, right? So we've also tried to be very careful about what things might be a very, very hot button height and have this discussion. All right. So
One-
I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just,
one thing you don't want to forget is SB 250, section 14.
right.
I mean,
Becky, can you pull
virtually-
your microphone closer because I'm having a hard time hearing you?
Okay, I said you wouldn't want to forget SB 250, section 14. Are y'all familiar with that?
Nope. I am not. Is anybody else?
Oh, my gosh.
Not that I
Okay.
can, I mean, I may be familiar with it, I just don't know
Yeah.
what SB 250 is.
Okay, SB
Senate Bill
250, section 14 of it, it's not codified into the Florida statutes. It is a provision that specifically says it's controversial as to exactly how it's interpreted, but frankly, in Fort Myers Beach, I don't think it's controversial as to what it covers. I think it covers the entire town. It says that until June of 2024, and I may be wrong on that exact date, but you can't have any zoning restrictions that are more restrictive or burdensome on development.
Then currently
Then-
exist?
Than currently exist, correct.
What was that
So
number again? SB
It's
what?
SB 250.
Senate Bill 250.
And it relates to properties which are within 100 miles of the landfall of hurricanes Ian or Nicole. And I guess I'm kind of blown away that you aren't aware of that.
Well, so we haven't talked about it in terms of the context. I think the bigger point is they don't want you dialing back development standards.
Well,
in
you
an
can't have
area of
anything
redevelopment.
that's more
Restrictive,
restrictive
correct.
or more burdensome.
Right.
And it applies to comp plan, it applies to land development regulations, and it applies to procedures.
So for example, if your downtown said 3 stories and you decided to change your code to 2 stories, you wouldn't be able to do that.
Right.
You go to 4, 5, 6, 10, whatever, but you can't go backwards.
Which makes sense.
Right. So that's a very important point Patrick's point in the interpretation of that policy, whether it does or does not restrict. That's the one.
Becky, could you send us a copy of that if you could, if you
Sure.
have? Thank
Yeah.
you.
But the second part that I want to follow up on Patrick's point is what's going to be interesting with this, with some of these applications, is there is an application now that includes an amendment to the comprehensive plan. They have submitted a request to amend your current comprehensive plan. At some point, that application review and this need to come together, right? So you can't approve their request for an amendment and then adopt a new comp plan that undoes any of those amendments, right? So we want to
Say that again, say that again.
So they're going down the path because they don't want to wait. Not sure what's going to come out of this. So they're going down the path of the current comprehensive plan. They're requesting to amend language in the
This is
comprehensive
Moss
plan.
Marine,
Yes.
Mhm.
So that application includes amendments to the comprehensive plan,
right?
which they can request. If those are approved or any of those are approved, what you don't want to do is then turn around and adopt this plan that doesn't incorporate that or changes drastically those amendments, right? So at some point, these two things are going to have to crash together and be sorted out. So if they're denied, it doesn't affect this, right? Or if they're modified, it doesn't affect this, you move on. It may be approved and then you have to incorporate some of that. But at some point, those requested changes of a current plan have to be considered of incorporating, if they're approved, into the, or they get done at the same time, either way. But at some point, those things are going to come crashing together. My guess is they hope they're quicker than this is. So that decision will be made, whether we'll have to then modify those to incorporate that language. I would suggest. I don't think you want to turn around and then change all the policy again.
Just on other general comments, and I'll give a little context as I think it helps people that are non-planners. The most recent true EAR, evaluation and appraisal report, that every municipality, county is mandated to do every 7 years, was done in 2007. Since then, the town has just sent a letter pretty much saying, we don't need to make any changes. DEO responded, yep, that's fine. Okay. So we have to go back to all the way to 2007 where we had any substantive changes to our comp plan. And again, if you look at most of the background information associated with the comp plan, and we've got a unique comp plan where you've got a lot of background research incorporated into the comp plan. A lot of it dates back to 1990.
Yes.
Everything associated with population projections, data associated with inventory of residential inventory of lodging units, all that stuff dates back to 1990.
Right.
Part of my concern is we're looking at making significant changes to our comp plan in a vacuum without the proper data analysis, without having a housing inventory, without having a commercial inventory, without having a parking assessment. And I've got a bit of a problem with that. You know, one of the things, there's discussion in here about parking and trying to limit parking. Well, we also have a land development code right now that shows preferred parking spaces, parking garages.
Right.
There are 3 identified in the downtown, and now we change the downtown provisions that would not allow parking or new parking areas. So,
Surface lots.
and I think there might be a distinction between surface or
Yes.
non-surface, but again, slippery slope of when it comes to interpretation
Mhm.
and coming forward. But the other thing is, like I mentioned, we establish a comp plan and we established densities that were not consistent with what was on the ground. If you look at the 2007 EAR, okay, it acknowledges that a lot of places have densities up to 17 units per acre,
Mhm.
okay? But we set it at 4 or 6 as a maximum, okay? We created all these nonconformities. It was fine when we wanted to prevent any changes on this island, but we've had a hurricane and we're dealing with a different reality. So we have to acknowledge that, okay?
Yep.
Our density ranges and what you've got in here is you've taken away, let's say you've established six as a maximum, up to 10 with affordable housing. There's a whole platted area where the platted overlay that acknowledge that there's a bunch of places where the densities are higher, and it protected those rights up to 10 units per acre for existing platted overlay. We've done away with this. So again, my thing is, let's look at the reality of what's on the ground. Let's create a density range of, yes, the standard is 4 or 6, but the reality on the ground is it could be up to 17 units per acre. That's your upper limit, and it protects those people and those existing properties, so someone doesn't have to go fight the town every time they want to redevelop their property. Because automatically you're inconsistent with the comp plan if you've got a non-conforming lot.
So there is where the rubber meets the road, right? That's exactly what we're talking about.
At least.
In that, for the last year, there's been a back and forth and conversation, and there's difference of opinions right now. And we're in the middle of that, right? So we're trying to help guide you, and the framework is here. And so if you want 20 instead of 10 units an acre, then let's change that number, right? Because there's a lot of conversation and feedback of no, and there's a lot of conversation and feedback yes. That's why I think Eddie said it, let you guys fight out that 15%, 10%, and let the council then follow that up. That's what we have to do.
But at the very least, I think even if we don't change that upper limit of what that density is, we need an acknowledgement in the comp plan that talks about nonconformity.
So you do.
So we have a nonconformity section in the LDC. Okay.
I agree with you.
We've
Yes.
got post-disaster build back that somewhat vests your rights and protects them. But again, we need an acknowledgement that we've got existing plats at 50-foot lots, sometimes by 80 or by 100, that we've made non-conforming years ago. And
we vest them. The policy, the typical way of doing it is just having a policy that simply says all platted lots prior to such and such date, which our code already says, and there's a policy in here that says they're vested. You don't need an overlay. What happened before is that the previous code and comp plan was trying to protect and vest densities and uses 3 or 4 different ways, and they're kind of overlaying each other. You don't need to do that. You can just say these platted lots and the existing lots of record are vested. That's it. Plain and simple. And then you don't have to worry about that. We don't have to talk about densities. We don't have to talk about anything. Whatever configuration they were or are, they're done, they're vested. And that's the simplest and cleanest way that.
Yeah, but let me give you another example. Okay, so you're going to have a redevelopment
But the density
project.
conversation is great. I want you guys have to have that. We need to know, because again, you're also on a barrier island. Let's not forget that, right? So the challenge is then sustainability and all this other, state mandates, talking about the conversations I've had. Why are you going to allow more people to live here? Our original version had higher densities, remember? And we've gotten pushback on that to reduce that. Also the FAR, both of those were pushed back to reduce those. If there's a will and want to go higher, that's fine. We just have to balance also that you don't go overboard because you're essentially your barrier island, right? So the concept is, why would you add more density? I'm with you on in the right form and the right place, it can make sense. But we just have to balance all those. So we're all for it, whichever way we want to go. We need a consensus. That's all.
The example with density and why also it's not just as simple as saying, if you're a platted lot, you retain that right, is we've got hotels that are going to be coming in asking for more. And how do you compare it to what they had today? Is it what's platted and multiplied by the multipliers we have? Is it what they have currently vested? Because what you have to understand is a lot of these hotels were approved at a time prior to this incorporation of this town, and they have more, and again, pardon me for using the term density, but that's how our comp plan works. We assign density to lodging units, which got an issue with that, but that's the way it is. But those are already over density. So
Well, they're over
What do you
density
com-
because what you talked about with the swing to reduce the densities,
Yeah.
right? So they're over density because the town swung that way for what the limit is. Right,
From
so-
comparison purposes to say, here's what they have today and here's what they're asking in the future.
Right.
It's also important.
And that's why we shifted to the FAR, right? The FAR, whatever that number is, don't focus on the number, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The shift to the box, and then the LDC is dealing with design and appropriate appearance. That's why we did that shift, so that at the end of the day, it was just a way to limit hotels and limit density, right? So if you want to limit that, put a real number on there as far as the box and let them figure that out. I don't know that most of the older hotels probably utilized their FAR. So there's opportunities there for them to get a little bit bigger. I don't have that 1-to-1 ratio of math. We didn't do that math. My guess is most of them will be able to do more than what they had. But again, that's a design function, right? Do you want more ballroom space? Do you want more amenities on your site? Do you want smaller rooms? They range from 250 typically to 500. I don't know what a typical hotel room is, 375, something like that. It just depends on that design too. Yeah.
One last comment. So again, talking about our geographic limitations being in Barrier Island. So I went back to the comp plan. I looked at the projections. And then I looked at, so it was 1990 census data that was used. We have projections. I went to the 2020 census data. And again, this is not being discussed out in the open, and I think it's an important discussion to have. We actually have not met the residential projections that were set out in 1990. We actually had at one point a declining residential unit, number of units. Also, when it comes to the inventory of lodging units, my understanding is that pre-Ian, we were actually down from the number of lodging units that were there pre-Charlie. And right now we're at a fraction, and I was given some numbers from the TDC, but we're at an extremely small fraction of all lodging units that were on this island. So again, we need to take that's part of the context. That's part of the evaluation we have to make. We can't just say, well, because we allow hotels to get a little more, is that a problem? Because there's the gross,
right,
and there's the net.
Right.
And we have to look at those on an individual basis. But we also have to understand that our hotel count right now is extremely low.
Right.
And some of these will not come back and redevelop. So we are not even close to being where we were. So being worried about this is a little premature in my mind.
I got you. I think
Yeah.
some of the challenges with that, those are good points in that be careful of a community-wide max on rooms, because once you start allocating them, then it's three groups that get it versus, right? So you got to be careful now. I agree that, but I just want to go back and I'll let Eddie get back on the presentation, because those are the key points, right? Those are exactly it. I'm glad you mentioned those, Patrick, in that, yes, there's a presentation of density here and there's a presentation of FAR. There was a year ago and there was a lot of pushback. So this is kind of response to that. If there's a will, and that's why we need you guys to make those decisions on what ultimately where will we be at. To your original point, this is the year, right? So I have written a letter to DEO and said, this will be our year. We know we have changes. We know we have things that we haven't done that were passed last year also, and as part of this. So this essentially will serve as the year plus, right? So don't forget, your evaluation appraisal report essentially is your evaluation of what's changed in state law, such as the property rights element. You have to have a property rights element. We don't have one yet because it's going to be part of this. So that would address that law. Senate Bill 250, all those changes, right? We're going to address those changes that in the last few years. This will serve that. Plus, it includes local decisions about things that they want their community to look like, right? I recommend to communities when they do the year, they try to break out your legal stuff and then your community stuff do separate. A lot of communities try to push those all together because they think it's an easier process. I think it muddies the water. In this case, we have an opportunity to take advantage uniquely. That's why we said, let's do it all together. And plus the timing of it just made sense. So you're doing two things. You're doing the legal side of it and you're doing the community wants and desires. So thank you but this will solve that. Yes, there has been several years that there wasn't anything done, and this will resolve that issue.
How would it be possible to get some numbers that would say, here's the numbers of homesteaded properties, here are the vacant properties that will take 1 to 2 years to build back, and here are the commercial properties that are able to repair as opposed to tear down?
Well, that part, I don't know. That's a lot of kind of decision making. I guess anytime you want data, I would ask you, why do you need that data, right? So the data should either tell you a story. To Patrick's point, the population has been decreasing. When we did the water supply plan update, the town did a couple years ago, that showed a decreasing population, right? So your projections are to continue decreasing. I think Eddie said that the first time he was here and did a presentation to you, is there's a trend of decreasing. Is that the commercialization of the island? Is that, what are, that's not homesteaded, that's not, those are other factors. I would just ask that all that data is interesting to know, but what are you going to do with it? What policy are you going to set from it? And that's why I said, be careful of the hotel room number. It's interesting to know, but ultimately form and function, in my opinion, matter the most. But yes, so whatever you want, we can look at. But
Yeah.
it needs to be, I think, uniquely and specifically helpful to the policy. Otherwise, we're just digging up data.
I'll provide the tables that I've updated. I've updated your comp plan tables with 2020 census data, and I've got those. So what you'll see is on the residential side, the percentage of residential units is roughly generally consistent with what was anticipated. But what we've seen is a significant decrease in full-time residents and more transient residents.
Right.
And again, we need to evaluate what that means from the standpoint of all our impacts on infrastructure. Again, if it's going to be a fraction of the demand on the infrastructure from transient units or seasonal people, then that means we have to look at our capacities and how that affects our capacities. So, but it's important because we've had discussions about, I've heard public discussions and discussions at the council of, well, we have to be careful in approving any of these projects coming forward because we have limited infrastructure. And I think some of the discussion was the size of the pipe used as an analogy. But also what I've explained to people is we have a whole section, a whole element of our comp plan that looks at those issues. And concurrency management has changed significantly since the comp plan was written. And people may not understand that, but for example, you cannot deny a development project solely based on transportation impacts anymore. It is the responsibility of the jurisdiction to mitigate for that traffic. And you can impose fees, fair share agreements, all that stuff. Also, when it comes to water and sewer, it is the responsibility of that local municipality to project the demand and increase the plant capacity in time to meet that demand. So again, can't deny a project saying you're gonna have more toilet flushing. No, it's our responsibility as a town to build in that capacity. So again, that needs to be part of public discourse. This is very important.
That's very interesting.
Right. Really appreciate the aspect of the data. Actually, that's how we got to the policies in the first place. You recall my PowerPoint presentation, I think over a year ago, about our housing and how who was actually occupying them, and how the lack of my argument that the lack of hotel room was actually contributing to, combined with state law on vacation rental, was actually contributing to the sheer amount of Airbnbs we had in the town, which is why the numbers look so skewed from the 1990 projection. And all that actually has been accounted for when we start thinking about the policy, right down to how we really wanted to go in and recommend to you to do away with that really weird residential to hotel ratio and just treat all the hotels as commercial space like other cities do, and so forth. Now, in taking it further back to our discussion and just segue from it, because I think it's really salient to the slide that we just pulled up, it's about the build back policy. And while we are looking at this in the change in terms points of resiliency standards, adherent to FEMA regulation for the building code that is actually going to be updated, I believe, in December. The other aspect of this is the aspect that Mr. Van Ask was talking about in terms of how we approach that acknowledgement of what exists. Build back is one way that we have acknowledged it and continue to acknowledge it within the comprehensive plan. So earlier draft, I think we're on draft 8 or 9 of this because of the back and forth for this one between Denti and everything else. One thing was we initially had taken out the build back policy aspect and we're like, what do we do with this instead? Looking now with all discussion and trying something simple, this is what kind of makes sense in light of the discourse that we've had with both the LPA and the council. But we do want you to kind of sit back and think about whether this is a one straightforward way, because what we would recommend you against is having the 4 different ways that kind of created the problem we have in the first place. It's confusing. We really do or should want to move away from that. The question then is this the most appropriate way, or is there another one that the LPA and the council prefers?
It would be nice for this to be, this has always been a provision that's been very clear to me, but I could drive you to examples on the island that
Right.
have used either pre-disaster build back that it's nothing like the policy.
Right.
But
So there might be some tweaks that are needed, and we attempted to do a little bit of tweak to it because there is a need to try to consider what people have vested, but then also consider the fact that we don't want you rebuilding something that they couldn't get knocked down the same way again. If there like something that we can do that, a little bit differently, and that's for the town attorney to have a headache on as well. I apologize, but it's like, what can we do? Is it different materials? Are there things that can be done if they're required to mitigate that impact on the individual? For example, are there aid programs that you require different material that can own it on them? But maybe there are ways to build in programs that mitigate that effect over time. And that way you get something that is built a little bit stronger, still keep the vested right, but it has to be a comprehensive package. And that's where the difficulty in the discussions are, right? Where the back and forth are. We don't know where the balance is, or we do, but we have 20,000 opinions on what that appropriate balance is. And that's where we are right now.
I would just like to make a quick comment that, between FEMA regulations and the Florida Building Code, which is going to be updated again at the end of this year, pretty strict building requirements in Florida for coastal construction. So I don't know that the town should have a comprehensive plan that goes beyond, or we have the expertise or whatever to go beyond what's already in pretty strict codes
Agreed.
as far as resiliency and build back. So if you build something back, you got to build to the current building code. It's going to be resilient because it's already in the Florida building code.
And that's exactly why we limited it. The tech policies in there to reach that effect. For example, 111 that you see up there. But then we also want to re-highlight a policy that we had previously mentioned, but really hadn't gotten direct feedback on. And at this point here, it's probably important to have feedback on it before we codify it. And that's 114, for example. New housing that be built with category 4 hurricane wind. It is about the threshold that we asked about, but that's where we need feedback.
I need a comment again. I think our current Florida building code for this area, the wind speed is over a category 5.
I think so too.
Really?
And so in the surge,
Yeah.
like the design for storm surges, well, your base flood elevation in the V zone is something like 22 feet here. So I'm not sure that policy is even necessary. And it's actually less than what would be required by the Florida Building Code and FEMA, the way I see it.
So would it be, Doug, do you think it would be a better idea to maybe keep the policy, but to refer to the Florida Building Code and FEMA regulations?
Yeah, I would say refer to current FEMA maps and current Florida Building Code would actually be stricter than that.
I love these little whispers because it makes me feel like, oh, what are they really saying? What is
No, so the trick with all of this is state law, especially the resiliency state law, wants you to reaffirm and confirm that you're going to do these things, right? So while you try to steer away from specifics, you also need to have policy language. It's kind of silly to confirm in your comp plan that you're going to follow by the building code because you have to anyway, but that's kind of where they push us. So more generalized, that's fine.
Well, then I would
Yeah,
say
absolutely.
just if you could refer to the codes rather than because like category 4 hurricanes.
It almost
correct.
becomes these aspirational policy. They're not aspirational, they have to follow, but it's almost like this. It doesn't really say anything, but it says we're going to do everything you already tell us to do.
Okay.
So we can get to there with that.
I like Doug's suggestion.
I would echo what Doug was saying on
Yep.
on the FEMA regulations and Florida building code regulations being pretty stringent. I think that what I would suggest is that we don't augment that, but we can provide incentives. So one of those examples is the amount of freeboard, and we've already talked about allowing someone to calculate their zone height starting at BFE +3. You're not mandated to go +3, but it's an incentive, and you can calculate your zone height differently if you do that. So I wouldn't say
I would agree
just-
with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say just do away completely with anything that's above and beyond Florida building code, but if it's an incentive, then I think we're perfectly all right with that.
And that gets to a point that I made months ago, which is that statement is critical for us. I don't think you necessarily need to have the criteria in the comp plan or that incentive specifically 2 feet, 3 feet, but you should have a policy that says we prioritize and want to incentivize additional freeboard, and the land development code shall spell out exactly how. But that policy that says that's a priority to us, or that's our third ranked one, or whatever, however you want to do it, that's important to me in the comp plan, is that we tie those two things together. It's almost like you want to use this as an opportunity to direct yourself to go do something. Otherwise, every time you go back and do that year, you go, oh, we were going to do something by 2025 and we didn't do it. All right, well then change that 2025 date to, or by 2023, sorry, change that 2023 date to 2025. That's a very common technique that people do. That due date passed, well, then I'll just extend the due date. We don't want that, but we do want to drive and say, you shall create incentives in the land development code to prioritize freeboard. That'd be a perfect way to do that. I agree with that.
Can you go back to the prior slide? One on strategies. Now, by making that statement that we would support, let's say, in a low-density, single-family area, the ability to switch to duplex, triplex, or quads, doesn't that destroy the low-density, single-family neighborhood?
You would think so, but I actually just did a presentation at APA disproving that because it's about the form of the building. And actually, in another affordable housing plan that we worked on, it was just adopted by the city of Miami for the Coconut Grove area. What we did was innovatively looked at the amount of square footage that house had and what a person or who might be more elderly might require. And we were able to actually take the same footprint of the building and redivide it in such a way that it was looked like a single family house on the outside, but we redesigned it so it could be a duplex, a triplex, because of how it's arranged. So there are ways, if you do the correct design requirement based on form within your code, that actually is comfortable. I mean, it boggles the mind, but we just proved it.
But go ahead, Jim, because could I just follow up on what Jim's saying there
Right.
too?
It affects density though.
Don't confuse form and density, right? I can hear where you're going with that. Most of our single-family neighborhoods have a low density assigned to them and continue to be assigned where they wouldn't necessarily be able to do that. So don't confuse the number of units and that density assigned with a form. So if you had a single-family unit that was in a higher density area that could create that density, we're encouraging it to be able to do that in multiple different ways, right? Not a single family that has a low density and doesn't have the right to more density. They can't use this policy to then create density. Your density is your cap, okay? Does that help?
If you allow an additional unit,
That's a density conversation. You've got to have the density right to be able to do it.
And Jim, the thing I'd add is let's say we like this policy, and again, not saying we should implement the policy or not, but the policy gives guidance, and then you have to have the right zoning. So you can have that policy,
Right.
but if you have a zoning district that says the only residential allowed in this zoning district is single-family residential,
You couldn't do it.
it doesn't change. The implementation is done at the zoning level. This is a policy which provides guidance. So it doesn't mean you could say in certain areas, we change our zoning and we're going to allow townhomes, this, multifamily, this or that. But you could keep another zoning district simply single family.
It is saying, right, potentially, it's density, right? Density is the thing that drives that. It doesn't supersede that. It can't go over it. It is saying that we're not going to just keep single family, right? Because most communities are shifting to we've got to find a place for housing. We've got to find a place for people to, if they're underutilizing density, it may be an opportunity. Accessory dwelling units is another way that communities achieve that. But it is not exempting from density. If you're in a community that has 6 units an acre and you're developed at 2, there may be an opportunity for some conversion of those units. If you're in a low density, 4 units an acre, and all your units are already at that density, you're not going to get more density.
And what precludes those, I'm going to call them conversion units, from becoming more short-term rental stock? As opposed to what your intent would be to create workforce housing?
We're superseded by regulating that as it is. So we can't regulate
So
short-term rentals.
they could become short-term rentals.
Correct. But there's some tool, go ahead, but there's some tools that we've talked about as far as incentivizing additional units that you get them if you do workforce housing or some other ways.
So the trick there is not to do it by right. The trick there is to do it as an opt-in program and to condition that opt-in program. Is the slippery slope in many cases, but it's one that other cities have adopted, and it has the right challenge. So, but if you're going to try to regulate straight up from vacation rental standpoint, you can't. The state statute preempt that. The only other aspect is to create a differentiated program where you're specifically saying, well, we're going to allow you to redo your house a little bit differently, but only under these conditions.
But
Owner
to pursue
occupied.
What Anita is saying is, I mean, we know that all the landlords are honest, but once somebody moves out,
You're from Chicago.
what's
Right.
what's the control coming back? Or later on in the dialogue here, you have a support for senior housing, adding an additional unit for a senior. I understand the parent, but the parent passes away.
Mhm.
Now we have an additional unit. What prevents somebody from now it becomes another rental unit?
Sarah?
Well,
So this, many of you were not on this board or town council at the time we had the discussions prior to Ian about affordable housing. And we are going to be bringing in another person about affordable housing to have conversations with you guys and with town council. But there are ways to do this by creating a community land trust, by creating an organization that basically handles that. So somebody would be getting an additional unit with going through a process. And as part of that process, they would have to agree that that was in a 30 or a 50-year affordable housing lease. So it would be part of a legal process. And there are additional layers in order to get it done correctly. But it seems like that's the direction that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like that's the direction that council has been interested, LPA has been interested in. So we're just trying to figure out the best way to do something like that. The first step is making sure that the comp plan says that we can do some of these things. And then the next step is figuring out how we actually implement that.
Right.
Does that make you
That
feel a
makes
little
more
better?
sense. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. The most important part of it is a lot of the aspect really go into what you can entice people to voluntarily enter in contract with as opposed to requirement. Because if you can't require them, then why are they voluntarily entering into 30-year, 50-year covenants on in exchange for what? Whether it's monetary considerations or other aspects for bonuses and so forth, or often aspects of policies. And that's really a crux of a lot of affordable housing strategies. Now, going back to affordable housing strategies as a whole, the state does look toward your housing element, and that has kind of little checkbox things like, do you have incentive? Do you have aspects you're working on? So we've gone ahead and put those in. There's some aspects where, in light of Live Local and SB 1336, that regarding auxiliary dwelling units and percentages and stuff like that, where we're trying to lay the groundwork for you to really take advantage of those as much as possible so that you can avoid the excesses of SB 102 if possible. But
Eddie, I had a question, and I don't know if it's Eddie or Sarah, but you brought up accessory dwelling units, and if we go back to future land use element, there was provision in there about allowing accessory dwelling units for properties that were less than 0.37 of an acre. I read that and I just did not understand. Can you guys clarify? So why would it be for smaller lots and not bigger lots? I did not understand how that worked.
So you have a rounding system. So under your existing, and we can always take it out, but under your existing regulations and comprehensive plan, there are a whole slew of properties where if you didn't provide that provision, they wouldn't, under the density rule, they would not be allowed an ADU. They would completely, you couldn't do it at all. Yeah.
So I struggle with this too, because we have that, there's a couple different things we have. We have the rounding up with the 15,000 square foot thing, less square footage, you get more. And a lot of that has a background in trying to protect old, I think it was TFC2 zoning that was with Lee County that allowed duplexes by lot kind of thing. But also sometimes your lot shape doesn't allow you to subdivide to create two units, but you could have an accessory dwelling unit because you have the acreage or the density. So it was trying to address that. There may be a more nuanced way to do it, but that's where that came from.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was trying to protect what was existing or trying to allow new
both
ADUs.
Kind of both.
And the 0.37 to me, it's like it's more. So right now, our most restrictive future land use categories are 4 units per acre. So
Right, and above that, you probably have enough acreage to get 2 units.
So if you're, but most people don't have a quarter of an acre as a lot, very few.
Right, but above 0.37, I think the math works out depending on some of the categories that you already have enough acreage to get to, so you don't need the provision for the accessory dwelling unit.
I was doing the math and.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you.
I couldn't figure it out.
Well, if there's a better way to, essentially it's allowing accessory dwelling units on smaller lots where appropriate and by the provisions.
Yeah, so my comment there is I think we need to just clearly talk about accessory units that are existing, protecting those as a policy. And then if we want to encourage new accessory dwelling units, then have a separate policy associated with that. Because the way it's done, it's not even clear. Is it protection of existing stock, or is it allowing you?
Right. So I think the other way to go about this then, that we toyed with earlier, was to do a separate ADU policy and then exempt that ADU from the density requirement. And so that way we could eliminate Texans here and we avoid the whole density rule issue.
And then the piggybacking on some of the
Right.
comments that we had earlier on, if it's not allowed by right and you have to request that ADU, can you then impose conditions? So for example, it's got to be owner occupied and it's got to be, you have to be able to produce a long-term lease of 6 months or more. Would that be ways you can control it?
Yeah,
Or-
I think, so I think you don't want to exempt all ADUs. I was thinking of it in terms of exempting those smaller lots that don't qualify for 2 units to allow an ADU under certain criteria, right? And to me, the best way, simplest way to let the community tackle workforce housing was that program Sarah was talking about. There could be other reasons why you do it. To me, that was the simplest way in the neighborhood. So we don't want a proliferation of them everywhere necessarily, and they got to be in the right place. But if it's for a good purpose, that was the idea behind it, I think. So yes, but it has to be, what is it that you want it for? When do you want to allow that accessory dwelling unit in a neighborhood that normally wouldn't have 2 units on a lot? I wouldn't say just
Yeah.
yes, and then maybe, the lease part is tough
Yeah.
because it's hard for us to monitor that unless it's a specific program that the town is now doing
Yeah.
that Sarah talked about. And to me, that would be the best way to do that. Tie it to that.
Yeah.
And if everybody's okay with that, then we can connect those 2 things.
And my recommendation, and again, not making a recommendation as to the direction we should go, but just structurally how we should address this in the comp plan is
Right.
2 separate things. One way of recognizing what's on the ground today,
Sure.
protecting those uses. And the other one is if we want to allow new ADUs, create a separate policy.
And I will say, and we'll make sure it is, but the intent in the draft is existing density by the current plan and the proposed plan is to protect the legally existing
Yeah.
number of units and uses. We're just trying to create a solution. So yes, and we're not prescribing it's got to be, could it be connected? Could it be separate units? Yeah, all that stuff could be achieved, but we are at a point where I haven't seen any other head shake, so I appreciate the conversation, Patrick, but we would like the confirmation from the rest on those types of things. That's a big policy decision that I think we need everybody to chime in on. So I thank you for that.
All right. Well, we continue on housing affordability and workforce housing. Really, the director